Sarah ran down the street with her heart racing. She was late. But how could this be happening now? During the night, her phone had run out of battery, and the alarm clock, of course, did not ring on time. When the girl opened her eyes, she immediately realized that she had overslept. It was too light outside. Luckily, she had prepared her dress from the evening, and it didn't need to be ironed. Of course, she wanted to do light makeup, but under the severe time constraints, that would do. Sarah hastily tied a high ponytail and managed to eat a sausage sandwich. Yes, it was unhealthy, calorie-dense food. But in her early 20s, she was clearly not in danger of becoming overweight. And now the girl did not walk, but ran along the sidewalk, almost flew to the bus stop. If the bus was a little late, she could still make it. She really needed to get to the interview. There weren't many people around. The streets seemed unusually deserted. It was a busy time. Everyone had already gotten to work, and lunch was still a long way off. If Sarah had more time, she would have loved to see the bright colors in the flower beds and the leaves on the trees starting to turn yellow. The beginning of fall is the most beautiful season of the year. But the girl was hopelessly late because of her own short-sightedness. How could she forget to put her phone on the charger? Sarah quickened her pace. She needed to make a good impression on her employer. Otherwise, the girl didn't know what to do. Her life had never been sluggish, but lately things had gotten quite bad. Some kind of black streak with no end and no edge. But Sarah was not discouraged. She knew for sure that at her young age one must move forward. A black streak is followed by a white one. You just have to do something about it. Besides the fact that she did not whine and did not feel sorry for herself, the girl tried her best. She called all the companies in the city, looking for vacancies, even thinking about part-time work. Accountants, as it turned out, were required few, but much more often flashed vacancies for cleaners. What to do? If you cannot get a job in the profession, you will have to take any job. Money will not earn itself. You can't expect help, but you have to live. When Sarah was fired from the colony, where she had worked in the accounting department for almost 3 years, they tried to console her. "Well, you're still very young," exhorted Susan Smith, the head of the personnel department. "You'll easily find a new position. Who's to be laid off but you? Not Laura, she's raising a son on her own. Or Dolores. She's in her 60s. Who'd hire her at that age? And you're still a child. At least you can live with your parents. They're young and strong. It won't be a big deal if you're out of work for a few months. Get some rest." Susan Smith had no idea how Sarah was doing, but the girl didn't even try to explain anything to her. She knew it was useless. The penal colony where Sarah worked had been downsized, and now the institution did not need 3 accountants at once. Someone in the payroll department had to be fired. She, the youngest, was chosen. Susan Smith said that in case of emergency, the young girl could live with her parents for a while. She gave as an example her daughter, the same age as Sarah, who was studying at the institute, did not work and lived in the care of her mother and father. But Sarah's situation was completely different. True, she didn't talk about it much. Not that she was ashamed. The girl somehow managed to contrast herself with her own mother from an early age. Mother on her own, Sarah apart. But she just wanted to start a new life. It was one thing to present herself in the eyes of new acquaintances as just a girl from the village, and another the daughter of an alcoholic. Sarah was well aware that this fact of biography would definitely affect her image and reputation, and she tried to avoid it. As long as she could remember, her mother always drank. At first, the girl thought that this is normal, quite natural phenomenon. Sarah simply did not know anything else. But as she grew up, she looked around carefully and realized that it was not so. The other children lived in full families, wore new clothes, ate well, were looked after, given gifts. They were taken to the city for rides and movies, and Sarah was literally surviving. Fortunately, a kind-hearted neighbor, Pamela, looked after the girl a little. The old woman often treated Sarah to soup or called her home to warm up when her mother, drunk, closed the door and the girl could not get home. Pamela periodically tried to reason neighbor Amber, "How can you behave like this? You wouldn't get in trouble. Get smart before it's too late," but Sarah's mother either listened to these admonitions in silence or answered the old lady rudely. At such moments, Sarah was very ashamed and offended for Pamela. The girl had such a mother, drank in the company of village alcoholics like her. The whole crowd often gathered at their house. They would party until morning, making noise, arguing, sometimes even fighting. It really scared Sarah, and she hid in the attic. There she had her own corner, a mattress, a plaid, a pillow, a few books given by neighbors, a flashlight. The girl did not feel safe in the room. Sometimes the mother tried to take up her mind. She even got a job then as a cleaner in the cow shed, then as an assistant in the canteen. The woman was welcomed, knowing that she had a daughter and feeling sorry for the girl. At first, during such periods, Sarah rested. She was reassured that everything would be all right. The house would be clean, and simple but delicious home-cooked food would appear on the table. Amber even paid attention to her daughter, took an interest in her life, made plans together. Sometimes she promised to take Sarah to the city, to the movies or amusement parks, but it never came to that. The mother snapped again, and everything returned night drinking, complete indifference to her daughter. Sarah grew up neglected. Sarah didn't know her father, but she hoped he was a prosperous, good man, though there was little chance of that. Her mother had been very beautiful when she was young, until she started drinking heavily. Sarah had seen old pictures of her. Maybe she had a great pure love then, the fruit of which was Sarah herself. Of course, the girl asked her mother about her father, but she invariably replied that she herself did not know who he was. She had a busy, fun life then to memorize and keep track of such little things. Fortunately, Amber had no more children. The first birth was complicated. Sarah grew up without siblings. Once she wanted a kindred, understanding person next to her together perhaps would be easier and more fun. But then the girl realized that all for the best. It is not worth her mother to become a large family if she does not follow one child. Sarah had never known her father and realized that she would never know. Not knowing allowed her to hope. The girl dreamed that the second half of the genes inherited from her father turned out to be more successful than the inheritance from her mother. Sayings like "the apple doesn't fall far from the tree" frightened her. Was she destined to be like Amber? But no way. Teachers, seeing the efforts of a child from a disadvantaged family, tried to support the student. Someone studied with her additionally. Someone bought some aids for the girl with his own money. Many people were interested in Sarah's fate. Once, when Sarah was finishing the 8th grade, she was summoned by the principal. Sarah went to the office, causing awe and terror in most school children, completely calm. The girl's conscience was clear, and Nicole was a balanced, calm woman who always wished Sarah only good. "Come in, sit down." The principal smiled broadly and offered the girl to sit in the chair opposite her. That day they talked about Sarah's future. Nicole had suggested a wonderful option to enroll after 9th grade at a school in the city. Some friend of hers worked at the institution who could arrange a place in the dormitory for a country girl. "Just imagine you'll live in the city, in a clean room to study. Then you'll find a job. Will you get married? Everything depends on you now. Will you manage? You'll have a good, happy life," Nicole said. "Scared of hardship? You realize you have no prospects in our village. Look at your mother." Of course, Sarah would manage. She had no doubt about it. The prospects were breathtaking. A bright future loomed ahead. She wouldn't have to live forever in a cold, dirty house, where some unpleasant people, her mother's companions, were always crowding around. Sarah was sincerely grateful to the director for such an offer and participation in her destiny, and decided that as soon as she became successful, wealthy, and she did not imagine otherwise, she would return to the village and give Nicole a mink coat. At that time, Sarah associated this item of closet with wealth and luxury. The year flew by. Sarah studied very hard, preparing for college. Her teachers helped her as much as they could. The mother, while she behaved as usual, brought friends to the house, did not work. The woman lived and walked on the allowance that the state paid her as a single mother. The whole village collected Sarah for college. Her neighbors gave her clothes from their grown children, provided her with money for the first time, and wished her a happy journey. "Find yourself a nice guy from a nice family," Grandma Pamela insisted. "And don't come back here. There's no more life for you here." Sarah smiled. She was going to accomplish everything on her own, not with the help of some guy from a good family. A new life was just around the corner. The realization of that fact was exhilarating. It even made her dizzy. Then school started. Sarah chose accounting. Nicole advised, saying that Sarah has enough intelligence and accountants are needed in every organization, so the girl would not stay without a job. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening to her for a long time. She lived in a clean, spacious room with 2 roommates, ate well in the dining hall, received a scholarship, which she could spend on clothes and textbooks, and studied. Sarah gave herself completely to her studies. She had to become not just an accountant, but the best accountant. She had no margin for error. Sarah made warm friendships with her classmates and roommates. But from student parties, the girl invariably refused. There was nothing wrong with having fun on the weekend, of course. But the noise, the clinking of glasses, drinking, laughter, all this caused unpleasant associations. Sarah involuntarily drew parallels with what was happening at home, and nausea came to her throat. The girl vaguely realized that she had been traumatized by a difficult childhood, and something had to be done about it. But not now. The main thing now was to study and find a good job, so that she would never return to the village again. She had nowhere to go back to. 3 years of study flew by unnoticed. The girl matured, got used to the city. She was considered the best student of the course. And that's why the teachers helped her with employment. The place, of course, was not the most prestigious, a penal colony on the outskirts of the city. But she, a girl with no experience, was taken, as they say, right off the street. And the salary was promised to be stable, not very large, but with quarterly and annual bonuses. This money was enough for rent, transportation, and food. Sarah didn't dream of more. The girl rented a small apartment near the new place of work, and a new stage in her life began. Sarah still could not believe that she had become so mature and independent. How wonderful it is to be a child. The bad. Children are defenseless. They are totally dependent on their parents. With mom and dad, it's just a matter of luck. Sarah wasn't lucky. But now she thought. Now the girl was quite consciously enjoying her new position. She was a correctional officer, an adult, independent. Sarah couldn't believe what was happening to her. Her life would be whatever she wanted it to be. Sarah loved her job. At first, she was put behind the cash register. She didn't have much to do here. Except for the end of the month, when all the staff of the institution lined up for salaries and bonuses. On such days, she even had to stay late. It was here, near the cash register, that Sarah met Ben. The girl often saw this guy in the building. She liked his smile, so warm, open. He himself was short, skinny, not particularly noticeable. But the smile and the gray eyes seemed to be sly. And they definitely attracted attention. The girl knew that the guy worked as a driver, saw how he gave rides to the colony staff. He caused her some previously unexplored feelings. Sarah could not explain to herself what it was. She only liked to meet this man in the corridor. He always looked at her carefully, studying her, interested. And this look gave Sarah a pleasant chill in her stomach and made her palms sweat, an inexplicable reaction of her body. One day, a handsome guy met Sarah in the hallway. In his hands was a bouquet of beautiful flowers. It was later that the girl found out that he was tearing them from the flower. The guy smiled. His cheeks showed charming dimples. For the most beautiful girl in the world. Sarah felt a wave of warmth. The girl silently accepted the flowers. She even lost her voice in surprise. But the guy's eloquence was enough for two. "You are incredibly beautiful," Ben complimented her. "And yet quiet, modest. My kind of girl. Would you mind if I took you for a walk?" "I'd love to." Sarah was too hasty. At that moment, she felt the happiest in the world. "Then give me the address." "I know you live around here, don't you? 8 o'clock sharp. I'll be waiting for you at the door." And he did. Sarah came out before the appointed time, but Ben was already sitting on the bench, his long legs stretched far forward in his sneakers. That evening, they both walked all around the neighborhood eating ice cream, laughing, talking about everything in the world. Ben was a great conversationalist with a well-tongued tongue. Sarah, always a little stiff, felt at ease and free with him. It was like magic. The girl told Sarah about her childhood. He had a way of being sincere. Probably because he didn't hide anything himself. Calmly said that he grew up in an orphanage and was not the most calm and obedient child, even in juvenile detention for theft. But then he got smart, studied to be a driver, found a job. He worked at a bakery. True, there he was framed by more experienced, clever colleagues, set up in such a way that Ben's shift lost money for products. Why, it was easy to think I was the guy, he grinned. A stint in juvie and orphanage. You couldn't find a better candidate for the role of a scapegoat. That's how I ended up back in juvie. I don't get it. Sarah, you had to do time again? Yeah, but my time wasn't up yet. What do you mean? It's like this. Didn't you know that? I thought you did. I'm a prisoner in a penal colony, serving my sentence. It's not a heavy sentence, so I work for the colony, I get a little money. The locals even let me into town, like today, for example. Sarah couldn't believe what she'd just heard. So this nice, friendly guy is a prisoner. What difference does that make, really? Ben is still the same charming, smiling, intelligent, very pleasant conversationalist. And Sarah obviously likes him. And the fact that he's in a penal colony, well, who doesn't? A guy was framed, and there's no one to stand up for him, just like there's no one to stand up for her. And in general, she and Ben have a lot in common: a difficult childhood and the need to make their own way in this life. Sarah decided that Ben's status didn't mean anything to her. The only thing that matters is that he's a good man, and he is. Even the staff trusts him. They let him go out on the town. I've only got 4 months left on my sentence, Ben said. Then I'll get out, get a job, and start a new life. I have a lot of plans. Ben and Sarah started dating. The girl fell in love with the cheerful, charming guy more and more every day. With him, she felt beautiful, needed, loved, special, a very unfamiliar, but very pleasant feeling. Ben tried to help Sarah in everything. For example, he looked for people who had to sign her papers. He drove her wherever she needed to go, carried heavy folders for her from the archives, brought her delicious buns from the canteen. He was always there for her. From time to time, Ben was released in the city, and then he took the girl to the movies, cafes, theater. Sometimes they just wandered the streets, talking about all sorts of topics. However, with Ben, it was pleasant to be quiet. 4 months went by quickly. Ben was released and moved in with Sarah. Where else would he go? It was impossible to live in the apartment, which he had received as an orphan when he was released from the orphanage. It was in an emergency building, from which the bricks were slowly falling out. It was scary to even go in there. Sarah was happy about this turn of events. Now she and Ben lived together like a real family. The guy turned out to be a handyman. He repaired a leaky faucet, changed a light switch, pasted wallpaper. Any job he could do it with his deft hands. And how did Ben cook? The smell of his fried potatoes and mushrooms even made Sarah dizzy. The only thing that marred the idyll was that Ben couldn't find a job. In the morning, when Sarah ran away to the office, Ben also left the house and ran to interviews until the evening. But when she came back from work, she found out that another day had been wasted. They won't hire me anywhere, the guy shook his head sadly. After all, 2 convictions and for theft. It's a stigma on me now. I can't get away from it. I guess you'll find something, Sarah reassured him uncertainly. Of course we'll get through this. But as time went on, nothing changed. Sometimes Ben had some money from somewhere, like he found a temporary part-time job. He'd unload a truck, then he'd spend a couple days at the market, then he'd work at a construction site. He'd spend it all on booze and snacks. Sarah was worried. Ben, the joker and the soul of the company, liked to have fun too much. He had a lot of friends with whom he often disappeared in bars and cafes. Sarah stayed home because she was tired after work, and she had to get up early in the morning, not like Ben. When the guy had no money, he lived on Sarah's salary. She kept silent, afraid of offending her lover, of spoiling their warm, trusting relationship. But the relationship was somehow imperceptibly changing. She and Ben had clearly drifted apart. Sometimes they couldn't even say a word to each other for an entire evening. No, the girl would have loved to talk to her lover. Sarah was still very attracted to him, whereas he had clearly grown cold to the girl. There was no longer the admiration in Ben's gaze that had once so enticed Sarah. When the girl tried to find out what was wrong, Ben became angry. "Why are you picking at my soul? Can't you see that? I'm going through a rough patch in my life. I've got to prove I'm not a criminal, find a job. And then there's you. But we don't spend enough time together. You're out with your friends all the time? I'm alone." "You should have fun too," Ben said. "You've got a lot of coworkers. You have a job and a paycheck. I'm out with my friends, maybe relieving stress. Do you think it's easy to feel second class? Everyone thinks being an ex-con means you're a lost cause. But they understand me and accept me for who I am. I understand and accept you." One day Sarah came home early and overheard Ben on the phone. He was talking to some woman, calling her Jenny and showering her with compliments. He was very similar to the way he had behaved with her in the first few months after meeting her. Sarah felt an almost physical pain in her chest, but still mustered up the courage to enter the room. Ben was a little embarrassed at first, but then angrily went into the kitchen where he calmly ended the conversation, only to return to the room. "What was that all about?" Sarah asked, trying to make her voice sound as firm as possible. "It was nothing in particular. This girl, I met her in a bar. Her dad's the shop foreman. I'm trying to get a job, you might say." That explanation satisfied Sarah at the time, probably because she really wanted to believe in this logical version. She just needed an excuse. Ben's job didn't work out after all. Despite everything, Sarah still loved Ben and hoped that things would work out between them. It is necessary just to survive this difficult period, and everything will be fine. But the black streak in the girl's life did not think to end. One morning, the chief accountant invited everyone to a meeting and said that there were going to be cutbacks, including the settlement department, where Sarah works. The girl tensed, of course, but she felt out of danger. Sarah worked for two people. She coped with all the cases perfectly. Besides, she was young. There's an older woman in the department. That she was a cousin of the boss, Sarah did not realize at the time. Sarah was not even alarmed when she was called to the HR department. Accountants and HR people have a lot of things in common. Nothing suspicious. But the supervisor informed Sarah of her dismissal. That evening, the girl, barely reaching home, collapsed on the sofa and burst into tears. What injustice! Why should she do this? She thought. Colleagues all day cheered Sarah, assured that she will easily and quickly find a job with an even higher salary. They said that everything was for the best, but they knew absolutely nothing about Sarah's life and situation. She can't be out of work for even 2 weeks. There's no way she could find a new job in that short a time. Business? Ben shook his head sadly. What are we going to live on now? I don't know, Sarah shrugged. You're not making any progress. It's quiet. Who needs an ex-convict? Yeah, that's how we got here, Ben sighed. We'll start looking at vacancies tomorrow, Sarah said, sobbing. I'll find something. I'm sure I will. I don't know. Jobs are hard to come by in the city right now, Ben was right. Sarah had heard that many times, but she hadn't cared about it before. After all, the girl worked in prison. She was absolutely satisfied with everything. Who knew how to pay the rent? Ben continued to lament. It's getting close to the deadline. Are they going to kick us out? No, I have a little savings. Sarah shook her head. She was saving a little from each paycheck, saving for a vacation by the sea. She dreamed of spending a romantic vacation with Ben in a southern resort town. But now this sum will have to pay off the landlord, so that at least not to be without a roof over their heads. Oh, that's good, Ben said. I didn't know that. Because it was a surprise, Sarah smiled sadly. I have the money under my mattress in a blue book. What now? All the next day, Sarah tried to find a job. They sent out resumes to companies in the city. What if she got lucky? What if someone responds? The tired girl returned home only in the evening. Her legs were buzzing and she had a headache. But Sarah knew she'd done all she could today. Ben was gone. He must have gone out with his buddies to a bar or a club or something. Sarah didn't understand how he could be so careless about the future. For her, not having a job was a disaster. And him? He didn't worry, he lived and had fun, enjoyed the little things. Maybe it was that easygoing nature that made Sarah fall in love with Ben. Something was wrong in the apartment. Sarah felt it at once, but only then realized what it was. There were fewer shoes around the doorstep. Ben had left in one pair of sneakers. That was understandable. But where had the other 2 pairs gone? And where was the laptop that Sarah had bought on credit? It always stood on the living room table. The girl, obeying a sudden impulse, opened Ben's clothes closet. There were no jackets, no pants, no sweaters. Slowly, the bitter truth began to reach Sarah. Ben had left, packed his things, and not just his own. He'd taken his laptop too, and disappeared, without even explaining anything to her. Sarah dialed his number, but all she heard in response was a short beep. It looked like Ben had blacklisted her or changed her number altogether. But why? He must have met someone else. Maybe he'd even gone to the same hottie Sarah had overheard talking to him. It hurts, but it's understandable. The only thing I don't understand is why Ben left without saying goodbye, and without saying anything, just ran away. Did what was between them mean nothing to him? The problems with her job suddenly faded into the background. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt a searing, tugging pain in her chest. She couldn't hold back the emotions that had come over her. She burst into uncontrollable sobs, which, as it turned out, had even more unpleasant circumstances. It turned out that Ben had taken the money from under the mattress, the very money that Sarah had planned to spend on the rent. The rent was due in a week. If she didn't, the landlord would kick her out on the street. And go where? Sarah had absolutely nowhere to go. She sat on the floor with her hands on her knees and thought. All sorts of thoughts collided and jumbled in her head. Ben, who was he? An unhappy orphanage boy with a hard fate, or a common criminal who could never be reformed? Had he ever loved her? Or was he just using her? And she, naive fool, didn't understand anything. Would the landlord give her an extension on the payment? Maybe he'd take pity if she explained the situation to him. Or, on the contrary, immediately kick her out the door as an insolvent tenant. Would there be a job for her in this big, uncomfortable city? Sarah quickly tired of her heavy thoughts and fell asleep on the floor in the hallway. There was no strength to crawl to the couch. In the morning, the girl washed her face, combed her hair, ate breakfast, and went to look for a job again. Soon Sarah realized that it was almost unreal to get a job in her profession now, and began to look at other vacancies. Okay, she'd have time to become a great accountant. For now, she had to find any place, as long as it paid money. Sometimes the girl was invited for an interview. They promised to call her back, but never did. And soon Sarah stopped believing these assurances. She searched hard, but to no avail. She had no money left at all. The girl stretched the last packet of groats and a loaf of bread and had no idea what to do next. Her situation was becoming more and more desperate. That's when the call came from the cleaning company. Sarah had been to an interview with them about a week ago. They didn't hire her then, but now there was a vacancy for a cleaning assistant, and the girl got a call back. The woman from the HR department asked Sarah to come in the morning with her documents. Only she warned her not to be late, because they didn't want any non-committal employees. And it should happen that Sarah forgot to charge her phone the day before. In the morning, the alarm clock did not wake the girl in time. She woke up on her own. She looked at her watch and was stunned. And now Sarah flew to the bus stop, not noticing everything around her. Just to make it, just to get to the office on time. She needed this job so badly. Sarah walked hurriedly down the sidewalk. Suddenly, a strange sight caught her attention. A pale, frightened old woman was sitting on the sidewalk. There was horror in her eyes. The old woman was struggling to breathe, a hoarse squeak escaping from her lungs. Sarah stopped, looking around. She should call for help, but there was no one nearby. It wasn't rush hour, so there was no one to help this woman but Sarah. But if she's late for her interview, she's out of a job. Wouldn't you? But Sarah couldn't pass up an old woman in desperate need of help. How can you leave someone in this position? What's wrong with you? The girl squatted down in front of the woman and looked into her face. Sarah ... she said with difficulty. Sarah had never seen people's lips so blue before. An ambulance? She asked. The old woman nodded. Sarah dialed the ambulance number, explained the situation to the dispatcher, and gave the address. The deed was done, but she couldn't leave the woman alone on the sidewalk and decided to wait for the ambulance to arrive. Sarah was hopelessly late for her interview. She could forget about the job, which meant there was nowhere to rush and nothing to worry about. "What's your name?" the girl asked, sitting down next to the old woman on the sidewalk. "Deborah," she exhaled. "Thank you, sweetheart. Don't ever leave. I'll sit here with you. Please, please, I'm afraid to be alone." "Were you in a hurry?" The woman spoke intermittently, taking hoarse breaths every now and then. But it was obvious that she needed companionship now. It distracted her a little, prevented her from panicking. "It's nothing." Sarah waved her hand. "No, it's important." The old woman struggled and tried to smile. "I saw on your face that you were in a hurry." "Yes, it's not an interesting story. I'll tell you later, if you promise to get better quickly." "It happens to me. Not for a while, though. My heart hurts. I need a shot. Well, they know in the ambulance, and everything will be fine." Just then, A yellow car with a horn honked. Two uniformed men got out and approached the old woman. Sarah stepped aside, letting the specialists do their work. They asked Susan Smith a few questions and actually gave her an injection. Within moments, the old woman's skin color began to take on a normal hue, and most importantly, her lips went from blue to a normal pink color. Deborah was getting better before her eyes. It was like magic. Doctors are a bit of magicians after all. Sarah thought the ambulance would take the old lady away after such a terrible attack. What's a hospital without a hospital? But the paramedics got into their car and drove off. And Deborah, smiling broadly, approached the surprised Sarah. "Don't you have to go to the hospital?" the girl asked. "What did I forget there?" The injection was given. The attack was relieved. "Now, I will go to the outpatient clinic to my cardiologist. He will choose pills, and I will again live peacefully for several years. It's a good thing I'm lucky I came across you, baby. Otherwise, I'd be lying here on the asphalt, no people around. Only cars passing by on the road. They don't even look around. It was an accident. I should have been here earlier. I was just late today because of my alarm clock. Now I'm glad I did. By the way, you promised that if I felt better, you'd tell me your interesting story," Deborah reminded me. "Remember, now you're in no hurry." Sarah smiled. "I'm in no hurry now. But there's really nothing interesting about it. Let's check it out." And Sarah told Deborah about her life, even mentioned her childhood, so that the old woman understood the girl has no home. She has nowhere to go. Deborah listened attentively to every word, sometimes sighing sadly, sometimes shaking her head. "Yes, you've had a hard life," she summarized after listening to Sarah's confusing story. She didn't even understand why it had happened. "But you say you suddenly felt better. And then I look at you with such understanding, even regretted, did not say anything. The main thing is working hands and feet. I'll find a new job somehow, don't doubt it. But it's hard for such a young girl in a big city all alone." Without support, Sarah smiled sadly. "It's my fault," Deborah said thoughtfully. "You lost your job because of me, didn't you?" "No way." Sarah shook her hands. "Don't even think about it." "I am thinking about it," she said. "And I've already thought of something." And Deborah suddenly made Sarah a completely unexpected offer. She invited her to live in her apartment. "Until things get better, no problem." "But I'm uncomfortable," Sarah admitted. "Uncomfortable sleeping on the ceiling? The blanket falls down?" parried the old woman suddenly, and then added seriously, "Honey, you actually saved my life. To give shelter to a kind girl in need of help, how hard can it be? And I myself will have more fun with you. I was all alone and alone." And so Sarah came to live with Deborah. The old woman gave her a whole room of her cozy 2-room apartment, the brightest and most beautiful, with windows overlooking the park. Deborah's offer came in handy, because the very next day after they met, the owner of the apartment asked Sarah to move out. She couldn't pay the rent, and the landlord immediately found new tenants. Sarah was given 24 hours to pack. The girl managed much sooner. She packed her belongings in a single suitcase and went to Deborah's house in the evening of the same day. The lonely old woman was obviously sincerely glad to have a lodger. Deborah behaved with Sarah in such a way that she soon stopped feeling awkward and constrained. Yes, it was an unusual situation, but it was good for everyone. Sarah had a roof over her head. And Deborah? She wasn't lonely anymore. She had someone to talk to watch TV with, to discuss news and recipes, to share her worries and joys. That meant a lot to an elderly person. Sarah, of course, tried to help Deborah in everything, but she herself clearly liked to take care of the girl. The old woman often cooked something tasty for her. She baked pancakes, fried pies on a griddle, made delicious stews of chicken and vegetables. No one had ever tried so hard for Sarah. Sometimes the girl even had tears in her eyes. How pleasant it is, such care. Sarah found a job after all. 3 weeks after the move, she got a job as a sales clerk in a neighboring store. The experience of working in the cash register at this place came in handy. When the girl came home, there was always the smell of something delicious: pies, homemade borscht. Deborah immediately led her to the kitchen, assuring her that a tired girl should definitely eat and rest. Sarah did not object. The girl often felt as if she had known Deborah all her life. She was surprisingly easy to be with, as if it was a normal thing to live with a complete stranger, a stranger in fact. After getting a job, Sarah tried to offer Deborah money to rent a room, but she flatly refused. "Oh, really? Are you like a niece or a granddaughter to me now? There's no way I'm taking money from you, and don't make it up. You'd better save it. Maybe gradually you'll have enough to buy your own place." Over time, Sarah learned Deborah's sad story. The old woman realized why she was alone in her old age. It was really very sad, scary even. Deborah was born in the village to a large family. She was the eldest of 4 sisters. When the girl was 10 years old, her mother died. Her father soon remarried. So into the house came the stepmother, as evil, cold and demanding as in the old fairy tales. She had 2 children, a daughter and a son, the same age as Deborah's younger sisters. This woman immediately disliked Deborah as the oldest and, understandably, a stranger. Her father's wife knew that Deborah saw and noticed everything, and how her stepmother chose the best bits for her children and gave her stepdaughters the leftovers, and how she was always complaining to Papa Gordon about the ill-mannered girls, and how she slowly dragged Deborah's own mother's few pieces of jewelry into her jewelry box. That was particularly hurtful for some reason. Stepmother forced her eldest stepdaughter Sarah to work from dawn to dusk, scrubbing floors, cooking, caring for the younger ones, cleaning the livestock. With her arrival in the house for the girl ended childhood. She no longer ran with her friends on the street, did not play with her favorite toys. Talika studied and worked on the household. Instead of gratitude for her help and work, the girl received from her stepmother only reproaches. The bed is not so made, and the borscht is not salty, and the child is unattended, fell off the stool, and hit through her teeth. The woman talked to Sarah, called her a girl, and sometimes even allowed herself to hit the girl, then on the cheek, then on the cheek, then on the head, then on the back. The stepmother was tough to deal with. Sarah was shocked at first. Her mother never laid a finger on any of them, always explained everything with words and here. And then the girl somehow got used to this state of affairs and accepted it. Even if Sarah tried to complain to her father, but he was completely on the side of the stepmother. She had already managed to explain to her husband that this is just a method of education, effective and efficient. "I do not want to raise children lazy and inept. That's what I'm trying to do," she said. And the fact that Sarah grew up as a quiet girl did not exclude fears. That's the 10th thing. The main thing, she knew how to obey and work on the household. As time went on, Sarah grew up, became a teenage girl. She did not do well in school, despite her natural abilities. Earlier, before her mother's death, she was an excellent student. She was especially good at the exact sciences. But now the girl had almost no time for lessons and studies. Sometimes her stepmother wouldn't let her stepdaughter go to school at all. This happened if there were a lot of household chores or needed to look after the younger ones. But met on the girl's way a kind, caring person, school math teacher Gordon. All teachers saw how hard it was for his student. But this man, a frontline soldier and father of 5 children, did not want to stand aside. He had some acquaintances in the city boarding school for gifted children. He begged them to take in an able girl who was in a difficult situation. When the teacher told me about it, I was happy at first, Deborah recalled. But then I thought about my stepmother and realized that it wouldn't work. She would never let me leave home. How could I be left without a free maid all of a sudden? But Gordon talked to Deborah's father, explained what prospects awaited the girl in the city, and he gave the go-ahead. Deborah left home at 15 and never went back. Life at the boarding school was good. In the morning, the children went to classes, after them to the canteen, where a delicious lunch was waiting for them. Then there was free time, during which they could walk, rest, and of course do homework. Deborah was finally able to play, socialize with peers, and quietly do homework. At first, the girl lagged behind the class. The lack of opportunity to learn properly earlier was the influence, but Gordon warned that it will be so. He advised to study especially hard at first, and assured that capable Deborah will quickly catch up with the rest. And so it was. After the new year, the girl became one of the best students in the class. "See how much we have in common." Deborah smiled at Sarah. "I too had to leave home, literally run away from my cruel stepmother and indifferent father. I too had to learn on my own, to make my own way in this life." Ended childhood. She no longer ran with her friends on the street, did not play with her favorite toys. Talika studied and worked on the household. Instead of gratitude for her help and work, the girl received from her stepmother only reproaches. The bed is not so made, and the borscht is not salty, and the child is unattended. Fell off the stool and hit through her teeth. The woman talked to Sarah, called her a girl, and sometimes even allowed herself to hit the girl, then on the cheek, then on the cheek, then on the head, then on the back. The stepmother was tough to deal with. Sarah was shocked at first. Her mother never laid a finger on any of them, always explained everything with words, and here. And then the girl somehow got used to this state of affairs and accepted it. Even if Sarah tried to complain to her father, but he was completely on the side of the stepmother. She had already managed to explain to her husband this is just a method of education, effective and efficient. I do not want to raise children lazy, inept. That's what I'm trying to do, she said. And the fact that Sarah grew up as a quiet girl did not exclude fears. That's the 10th thing. The main thing, she knew how to obey and work on the household. As time went on, Sarah grew up, became a teenage girl. She did not do well in school, despite her natural abilities. Earlier, before her mother's death, she was an excellent student. She was especially good at the exact sciences. But now the girl had almost no time for lessons and studies. Sometimes her stepmother wouldn't let her stepdaughter go to school at all. This happened if there were a lot of household chores or needed to look after the younger ones. But met on the girl's way a kind, caring person, school math teacher Gordon. All teachers saw how hard it was for his student. But this man, a frontline soldier and father of 5 children, did not want to stand aside. He had some acquaintances in the city boarding school for gifted children. He begged them to take an able girl who was in a difficult situation. When the teacher told me about it, I was happy at first, Deborah recalled, but then I thought about my stepmother and realized that it wouldn't work. She would never let me leave home. How could I be left without a free maid all of a sudden? But Gordon talked to Deborah's father, explained what prospects awaited the girl in the city, and he gave the go-ahead. Deborah left home at 15 and never went back. Life at the boarding school was good. In the morning, the children went to classes, after them to the canteen, where a delicious lunch was waiting for them. Then there was free time, during which they could walk, rest, and of course do homework. Deborah was finally able to play, socialize with peers, and quietly do homework. At first, the girl lagged behind the class. The lack of opportunity to learn properly earlier was the influence, but Gordon warned that it will be so. He advised to study especially hard at first, and assured that capable Deborah will quickly catch up with the rest. And so it was. After the new year, the girl became one of the best students in the class. See how much we have in common. Deborah smiled at Sarah. I too had to leave home, literally run away from my cruel stepmother and indifferent father. I too had to learn on my own to make my own way in this life. After boarding school, Deborah easily entered the university. She was given a dormitory. The fragile, beautiful girl chose the profession of an engineer. She graduated from the institute with honors. She got a job in a design bureau, from which she immediately received a small apartment as a young, promising employee. It was easier back then, with housing for young professionals. Deborah sighed. Is it more difficult for you now? So the girl stayed in the city. Now she was a real engineer. At work, Deborah was respected for her hard work, keen mind, and willingness to help others. After a few years, she became head of the department. I thought I was going to live like this for the rest of my life, Deborah said. I decided to devote myself to my work. I liked that kind of life without children in the family. I didn't want that at the time. I studied very hard as a child. I thought I had done my fair share. Only fate had it differently. Deborah often flew to New York for work. This time she was sent for training. The woman loved such business trips. They perfectly diluted gray everyday life, gave new emotions and impressions. After the seminar, Deborah decided to walk around the city. She liked these wide, crowded streets, so spacious, so lively, not at all like their small, quiet town. Deborah walked slowly along the river embankment, looking at the boats and pleasure boats with dressed-up tourists. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting everything around her an incredible yellow-pink color. It was at that moment that Chris approached her. A young, tall man with a charming smile and warm gaze immediately introduced himself. He apologized and showered Deborah with compliments, calling her a mysterious beauty, a queen, a beautiful stranger. Of course, by the time she was 45, Deborah had been in relationships, and in more than one. And she'd learned to take compliments. But then something suddenly fluttered inside. Chris, seeing it, became enthusiastic, glowing. Deborah was pleased to realize that her presence alone made this man so happy. They took a long walk. That evening, Chris turned out to be talkative, and it was very useful, because in the conversation there were no awkward pauses and hiccups. He amused Deborah, making her laugh at his jokes. After a couple of hours, it seemed to her that she had known this man all her life. She did not want to part with him at all. That's why Deborah didn't come back to the room alone. The concierge looked at us like that. Deborah smiled. What was the big deal? We were both adults. Who cares? The next morning, Deborah found Chris in the room, as well as her wallet with money, gold jewelry, and even a few almost new dresses. Everything fell into place. Chris had just grasped her trust, said a lot of things, waited until the new acquaintance relaxed, and was so. Deborah did not report him. It would look too unattractive in this story. She met a man on the street, brought him to her room, and he turned out to be a common criminal. Reputation would be seriously damaged. You see, that's a coincidence. Deborah smiled at Susan. Both you and I were fooled by a man. It happens. Only mine not only took my valuables, but left something behind without even realizing it. A month after the ugly story, Deborah realized she was expecting a baby. There was no doubt about who the father was, the same Chris from New York. Deborah didn't know what to do. On the one hand, the child she could pull and alone would be no worse than a married woman. Her apartment was spacious and comfortable. The salary of the head of the engineering department allowed to provide even more than one baby. On the other hand, age. At that time, to give birth at 45 to the first child was considered catastrophically late, although now it does not surprise anyone. And what would people say? Deborah still had strong provincial prejudices about living with an eye on neighbors and acquaintances. And yet the woman made up her mind, realized that this was her last chance to become a mother. She might never get another chance. She had once decided for herself that she would live without children. But realizing that a new life was born under her heart, suddenly desperately wanted to keep this baby. And that's how Deborah got Bill. This guy grew up to be amazing, attractive, charming, smart. Bill had many talents. He drew beautifully, started reading early. He definitely had a knack for math. Even from an early age, the boy was fond of sports, tried many things: soccer, basketball, karate, skiing, hockey. Deborah supported all of her son's hobbies. Bill was a joy to her. She had never imagined that it was possible to love someone so much. The boy reciprocated his mother. He helped around the house, made surprises and gifts just like that, without a reason. Time flew by very quickly. Deborah went on a well-deserved vacation. Bill grew up and went to study, as his mother once did, for an engineer. At the university, he started hiking. The department had a section for students. Wherever they went, they rafted on the river, went to the forest for a week, and went down into the caves. On that fateful day, a group of students went into the mountains. Deborah's heart had been troubled for days before the hike. There was no doubt in her mind that Bill was an excellent climber. Her son is agile, trained from childhood, smart, will not make mistakes. But not everything depends on people. There are unforeseen circumstances. The mountains were a 3-hour drive from the city. The students were going to conquer a particularly difficult peak. The day before, Bill had excitedly told his mother how he had long dreamed of climbing the peak. In the afternoon, Deborah somehow got wound up. A friend came over. Then they went shopping together. Distracted, Deborah even stopped worrying. That evening, that phone call rang. Deborah, looking at the phone, froze. For some reason, she didn't want to pick up the phone. Something told her she was about to get some bad news, and so it was. A group of students had been caught in a mudslide down the mountain. Several people were killed, many injured. 2 boys, including Deborah's son, went missing. And endless hard days dragged on for the 2 elderly mothers. Rescuers spent a long time removing the rubble. Among the rocks and dirt, they found the body of one of the missing boys. Bill, the other one, was never found. You realize there's no chance the man in uniform explained to Deborah. If he was alive, he would have made himself known by now. He stayed under the rubble. It's physically impossible to make out everything. Bill was recognized dead, but for 3 years Deborah could not accept this state of affairs. She never saw the body, so she could not believe what had happened. So Deborah lived with a faint hope for a miracle. The old woman showed Sarah pictures of her son. From them smiled an attractive young man, tall, athletic, with blue eyes. Even from these pictures, it was clear how energetic and cheerful he was. It's hard even for me to believe that such a man no longer exists. Deborah sighed as she looked at the photos. She smiled too. and she often said, "Maybe we'll see him again." "My intuition tells me he's alive," the woman shook her head. "Perhaps I just want to believe it, and yet I feel that he is alive out there somewhere." Once a year, on the day of the tragedy, Deborah would visit the place where it had happened. She sat there at the foot of the mountain, admired the scenery, and remembered her Bill. She would leave flowers at the site of the tragedy for those guys who died under the rubble. After hearing this story, Sarah felt even more for Deborah. She felt sorry for the older woman who had never been able to come to terms with her loss. But Deborah's resilience, her belief that Bill was alive, both admired and caused a pang of sadness in her heart. A year and a half passed imperceptibly. Sarah lived with Deborah and worked as a saleswoman, but she wanted more. Did she study accounting for nothing? So Sarah was always looking for a job in her specialty. And one day luck smiled on her. The girl got a call and was invited to an interview at the factory. An accountant was required. Sarah went to the meeting in a calm mood. Sarah had already been to so many interviews that she could write a book for beginners. If she didn't get the job, it was okay. She had a job, a roof over her head. Not like a year and a half ago, when she suddenly found herself in a desperate situation. She's fine now. But they hired her and told her right away that she was a good fit. They didn't even say, "We'll get back to you." Sarah gasped at first with a rush of emotion. Had her long-held dream come true? Would she really work in her profession in such a big factory and get a good salary? She couldn't wait to share the news with Deborah. Sarah was also given a dormitory at the factory. The building itself was far out of town. "Every day you drive back and forth, you get tired," Deborah said. Most of the employees lived in a cottage community nearby. The rest occupied rooms in a comfortable dormitory on the adjoining property. Deborah was happy for the girl. But the news that Sarah would have to move saddened the old woman. "I'm so used to you. I'm going to miss you," she admitted. "But I'm happy for you. It's a dream come true. I will come to visit you often," she promised. She understood that she would also miss this cozy apartment and kind landlady. Deborah saved her, offered help in a critical situation, became a really close person for Sarah. The girl will never forget her. A new stage of life began. At work, she had to get into everything anew. She had forgotten a lot of things during her work as a salesman. Sarah made a lot of new acquaintances. Everything was so exciting, so wonderful, so new that the girl could not keep her promise to visit Deborah every weekend. She understood everything and did not take offense. But Sarah made sure to call the old lady every evening, asking about her affairs and sharing the news. Deborah always listened attentively, praised and supported her. Sarah felt strong after these conversations. One day the old lady called Sarah herself. It happened on New Year's Eve, when the town was preparing for the holiday. The girl tensed up a little. She usually called Deborah herself. Suddenly she was the first one to call. Was something wrong? She realized that nothing was wrong as soon as she heard the familiar voice. The always calm Deborah could barely contain her emotions. "Bill has been found." The old woman almost shouted into the phone. "He's here. He's alive." Sarah could not believe what she heard. Unlike Deborah, she shared the opinion of the rescuers and the police that the boy had not survived. "He came home this morning, opened his own key. Can you believe he hasn't lost it in over 4 years? It's a miracle." Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. "It's incredible," she exclaimed. "Yes, it is. As a physicist and a mathematician, I have to admit that there are miracles after all," said Deborah. After all, the chances of salvation for Bill were minimal. "What now?" asked a worried Sarah. "What's it going to be like now?" "Well, Bill has so much to do now. He's been declared dead. There's a lot of paperwork to get him back on paper. He's dealing with it." "What about me?" Sarah asked. "I don't want to get in his way. A man needs to rest, get used to everything." "You don't know my Bill," Deborah grinned. "He's always happy to have visitors. We've had a bunch of his friends at our house since he was a kid. Bill never knew how to relax." Sarah could hardly wait for the weekend. She wanted to see Deborah's son sooner and learn his amazing story. Where was this man for so many years? Why did not give any information about himself? But the girl was worried before the trip, too. Sarah was worried about how this Bill would take her. The girl who had occupied his room for a whole year and a half while he himself had been missing somewhere, perhaps enduring hardship. Deborah opened the door for Sarah. It was as if she had grown younger these days. Her eyes shone with happiness. "Hello, come in." Deborah hugged Sarah tightly. The girl gingerly entered the hallway. From the kitchen came voices and laughter. It was Bill's comrades who had come. One of them was with him in the mountains during the mudslide. He had a long convalescence. But he's all right now. He's alive. Come on, don't be shy. Sarah went into the kitchen. There were people sitting around the table. Deborah's friend, two guys a little older than Sarah, a smiling girl. On the wide windowsill sat Bill himself. The girl recognized him immediately from the photos. He looked at the guest and smiled. Slightly disheveled blonde hair, tanned face with correct features, clear blue eyes, wide smile. "You are the Sarah that Mom saved." The boy easily jumped down from the windowsill and came closer. He scrutinized the woman who entered. Sarah was embarrassed under his gaze, but the guy's proximity was unexpectedly pleasant. "But saved. That's a big word for it," the girl replied. "And you? You are the man who disappeared 4 years ago. And then suddenly found?" "Yes, I am," Bill grinned. "That's quite a story. You could make a movie." The evening passed quickly. The company was good and warm. Sarah was welcomed. She didn't feel like a stranger, though she saw everyone here, except Deborah and her friend, for the first time. For the first time, Bill told his story to the crowd. Apparently, he had to explain what had happened to him not for the first time, and remembering the past was not very pleasant. But the people close to him wanted to know the story, and the guy told it over and over again. Bill was one of the first in the group to realize that something terrible and inevitable was happening. First, he heard a growing rumble. Then he saw a dark mass coming at them from the top of the mountain. There was nowhere to hide. There was no escape. Their group was just coming up the steep climb. It wasn't hard to run all the way up there. Bill had time to look down. He saw the multicolored bright helmets of his classmates, who had no clue about anything yet. Somewhere far below, a river was winding in the sun. The next instant, Bill was hit by a heavy wave of mud. The boy felt himself being carried downward at a terrifying speed, and then he lost consciousness. Bill woke up in the hospital. He was covered in abrasions and deep cuts. His legs, his arms were broken, his head was shattered. The doctor promised the boy would live. Then he asked him his name. Bill opened his mouth to answer, but suddenly realized he didn't know his own name. He couldn't answer any of the questions. He couldn't remember where he came from or what had happened to him. Had no idea who his parents were. Didn't know anything about himself at all. Everything from before the hospital was strangely erased from his memory. "It's amnesia. It happens," the doctor explained. "After a brain injury, the memory is bound to come back." But time passed, and the boy still could not remember anything about himself. It frightened him, made him afraid for the future, and for the past too. Who was he suddenly in that life, of which there were no memories? Had he done something terrible, or had something terrible happened to his family and friends? Why did his brain shut off his memory? There's a reason. The guy was in the hospital for months. All this time, doctors and police tried to find his relatives, gave ads in newspapers, sent out an orientation. There was even a story about him on the local news. But no one ever responded. "No one is looking for you, it seems," sighed the head doctor, looking at the unusual patient. "Are you really such a lonely person in your young years?" The boy was silent. He had nothing to answer the doctor. He himself would have given a lot to know the truth about himself. One of the nurses gave the patient a temporary name, Arthur. He reminded her very much of her nephew, whose name was Arthur. The boy agreed. Arthur, so Arthur, what difference does it make? But he felt he really had some other name, and hoped that someday he would be remembered after all. When Bill got a little stronger, the doctor advised him to take a walk around town. He assured him that if he saw something familiar, it could be a trigger for the return of his memory. The boy obediently wandered through the crowded wide streets and greedily looked around. But nothing the local houses, squares, and parks evoked any response. They seemed utterly alien and unfamiliar. And then it was time for Bill to be discharged from the hospital, because he had already made a full recovery. He couldn't be kept in the hospital any longer. "So where am I supposed to go?" The boy asked the doctor. "A social shelter. You can still get a job. People live there for up to 6 months. Then we'll see. Maybe someone will turn up. Just don't give up looking. Bill spent 6 months in a social shelter, worked at the local sawmill, made new friends and comrades. Everyone supported the guy, tried to help him find his relatives. They gave announcements and leaflets on the streets, and so people were interviewed. But these measures still had no results. Bill decided to live in the conditions that fate offered him. He got a job as a janitor, and the Housing and Utilities Department gave him a small, cramped room under the stairs. But the guy had enough space. He worked on someone else's documents. He had none of his own. Bill accepted this life. He even started to like it. A free tramp with no past. Still, sometimes Bill would jump up at night in bed from some vague, disturbing dreams. He'd wake up in a sweat and couldn't remember what he'd just dreamed. But he knew it had something to do with the past. There was a small television set in Bill's den. The guy liked to watch the news in the evenings, but sometimes he also watched soap operas. It made it easier to fall asleep. And then one day it happened under the New Year's Eve, the TV screen suddenly went interference. This often happened. The guy began to spin the antenna at random and caught an unfamiliar channel. News of some other city he was about to switch over, but suddenly a statue caught his attention. A journalist was broadcasting something about traffic jams blocking traffic in the city. She was standing near the fountain, and Bill realized that he had seen the statue of a boy with a toy bear in his hands standing in the center of the fountain many times. Immediately, memories began to come, scraps of vivid, realistic scenes. Here he is, 8 years old, running with his friends along the bottom of the fountain around this very boy with the bear. They are collecting coins that they managed to throw here for luck. Passers-by shout and argue, will they have enough for ice cream? He's about 18. Next to him is a woman. She has such a kind, dear face. Mom is Mom. The person who always supported him in everything. How could he forget her? Flashes of memories flashed with dizzying speed. The boy remembered everything: his name, his address, his hobbies, his whole life before the hospital. And the moment of the landslide, too. Then his eyes suddenly went black. Bill realized he was losing consciousness. The thought flashed through his mind, what if I forget again? It didn't. Bill woke up on the cold floor. He sat up, looked around. He remembered everything. The boy knew who he was and where he came from. And now there wasn't a second to wait. I went to the police and told them everything Bill recalled, looking off into the distance. Everyone listened with bated breath. Even Deborah, who already knew the story. They sent a request, then called my mother to identify me, he continued. Of course I recognized him, Deborah interjected. Deep down I always knew this moment would come. So I wasn't surprised. In fact, I was glad. How did you get so far away from here? How did you get to that town? One of Bill's friends asked. The current must have swept me right into the river. That's what saved me, Bill answered. I was unconscious, but by some miracle I didn't drown. The current carried me many kilometers ahead. Somewhere out there I washed ashore. Local fishermen found me, called the police and an ambulance. That's how it all came together. So they sent out an APB on you in a completely different neighborhood, said the girl thoughtfully. Is that why they didn't find you? Bill nodded. And then suddenly his face lit up with a wide smile which Sarah had already taken a liking to. Well, why are you sitting so glum? The main thing is that everything ended well. The rest of the evening went wonderfully. Everyone talked, laughed, recalled funny incidents from Bill's past. He told the audience about his former life. According to him, it seemed that the guy had had an easy and pleasant life even then. But Sarah realized that it was certainly not easy. Bill is an easygoing, cheerful person. Such people never complain and do not portray themselves as victims, but find the bright side in everything. Sarah suddenly realized that she was trying to catch Bill's gaze. When their eyes met, it was like a warm wave washed over her. She liked everything about this man, his appearance, his demeanor, and his voice. Sarah tried to keep her eyes on the handsome guy, but she couldn't help it. She could only hope that it was not noticeable to the others, who fortunately were very much engaged in the conversation. As darkness fell, it was time to leave. Bill suddenly volunteered to walk Sarah to a cab. Deborah had given her some goodies, pies, pancakes, even pilaf in a casserole dish. She always did that, thinking that Sarah didn't eat anything alone. That's why she was so thin. It's a magically beautiful evening, Bill remarked when he and Sarah were on the porch. The girl agreed with him. The moon, which had come out from behind the clouds, turned the snowdrifts into frozen sculptures that had come down the hill. Yes, Sarah nodded and added, "It's warm. It's nice. I don't even want to go home." "Maybe you don't have to." Bill squinted slyly. "I suggest we take a walk in the park. See how beautifully it's always decorated for New Year's Eve. I haven't seen it in a long time. I'd like to see it." "Are you in?" "I'm in." Sarah answered. A quiet joy rose in her heart. She was so reluctant to leave Bill, and now he offered to continue the evening. The guy confidently took the girl by the hand and led her towards the park. He cheerfully told about his memories connected with this place. But Sarah almost did not listen. Her ears were pounding. Her heart was racing. Her cheeks burned like flames. She marveled at the effect this man had on her. This had never happened to her before. Bill looked risky, free, and natural. He walked as if nothing had happened, held Sarah's hand, and seemed to notice nothing special. He continued to tell her something, pointing one way or the other. Sarah wanted this moment to last forever, her palm in his, him by her side. But Bill was spotted by some guys she knew. They came up to him, barraged him with questions. He let go of Sarah's hand to say hello to his buddies. And then a girl appeared out of nowhere, a very pretty girl, tall, slender, with long blonde hair poking out from under a hat. She threw herself around Bill's neck. He picked her up easily, whirled her around. The girl suddenly kissed him right in front of everyone. Bill looked at her with joyful admiration and did not let go. "I guess I'll be going," said Sarah. The magic of the evening was irretrievably lost because of that beauty in the soft blue coat. So graceful and perfect, like a goddess. And Bill's looking at her. There's something between them. Maybe she was his girlfriend before all this happened to him. Why? Bill looked at her with surprise and regret. Sarah was very excited that night, Bill said. "The evening is just beginning. I'll introduce you to everyone here. You're going to love it." Sarah got ready and started to call a cab since she had to be early for work tomorrow. Her friends walked Sarah to the car. Bill was holding the hand of a beautiful girl in a blue coat named Emma. Sarah realized that she and Bill had once gone to school together. At home, Sarah took a warm bath to calm down. But it didn't help. She still couldn't find her place, pacing from corner to corner, remembering the episodes of that amazing and so long evening. She tried to make sense of her feelings for Bill. He had clearly caught her eye at first sight. Was it really love? After the sad story with Ben, Sarah had tried to avoid even a hint of romance. She'd gotten burned too badly back then. And then she remembered the episode with Emma. She couldn't stop thinking about it. And when Bill took Emma's hand, Sarah's eyes swam. The situation with Emma had caused Sarah unexpected pain. She was still reeling, imagining Bill and Emma together and speculating, trying to figure out who they were to each other. Obviously there was, or had been, something between them before. Or will there be in the future? Sarah didn't sleep a wink until almost morning and then made the decision not to think about Bill anymore, not to dream about him, not to make plans. He was no match for her. So smart and handsome and manly. Not everyone could handle what this guy had to endure. Who is she? No, Bill's more suited to a girl like Emma. That's something we have to accept. Deborah and Sarah decided not to go to her place for the time being. She was afraid of meeting Bill. She missed the old lady and often called her, but refused invitations to come over, citing busyness. And so it was in fact at work, hot time, reports, inspections. No time to visit. Deborah sometimes said something about Bill while talking to Sarah on the phone. The guy was back at university and decided to finish his studies by correspondence, because he got a job and started his own business at the same time. He lost so much time and now he's trying to make up for it, Deborah shared with Sarah. Her voice was clearly proud of her son. He was always so active, and now he's just not at all. I hardly ever see him at home. He's out and about. That's good. That's great. I still can't believe I finally found my son. If you can't come to me, I'll come visit you. I miss you tonight. I'll bring you some pies because I know you probably don't eat anything there. Sarah always enjoyed Deborah's visits. She was used to sharing all her worries and joys with her. But now she couldn't tell her loved one about the most important thing, because Deborah was Bill's mother. And yet Sarah met with the guy a few more times. He'd pick up her mother when she stayed late at Sarah's house. He'd come into the room with a smile on his face. and it would become cheerful. The house was filled with a special energy, which Sarah felt almost physically. Bill joked with Sarah, asked her a couple of non-committal phrases. He was good at keeping a casual conversation going. He was interested in the girl's affairs and occasionally said something about himself. Sarah tried desperately to glean from his stories and Deborah's words whether Bill was seeing Emma, but it was impossible to understand. On a lovely May evening, Sarah was coming home from work. She felt light and peaceful. The sight of nature awakening always had a calming effect on the girl. Besides, tomorrow was a day off, and all the reports were already turned in. She could relax and unwind. At the entrance of the dormitory, Sarah noticed Bill's car. Her heart raced, as it always did when she met this man. The guy had already seen her and got out of the car. He stood with his elbows resting on the bumpers, smiling as always. Strange, why was he here? "Hi," said Bill. He pulled up alongside him. "Girl, hello. I don't have Deborah. Is something wrong?" "I'm not here to see her." "Who was it for?" "You, of course." What did Sarah feel? Electric pulses running through her body. He said, "To you, meaning her, Sarah, me?" Automatically, the girl asked again. Yes, Bill's smile grew even wider and warmer, or something. "You have such a surprised look on your face, as if some star had come to see me, not me." "Well, it's not every day you come to see me either," Sarah smiled back. She tried her best not to show her joy at seeing her boyfriend. He had come to see her, the two of them alone, with no one else around. "Decided it was time to have a serious talk," Bill said suddenly. He'd been meaning to for a long time. "Do you have time?" Does she have time for Bill? She always does. Sarah nodded affirmatively. "Good. Then get in. I'll take you to a very nice place." The girl gladly settled into the front passenger seat. Bill drove her through the evening city and, as always, told her something and joked. Sarah felt really happy at this moment. He's there for her. They are going somewhere, it doesn't matter where. And most importantly, there is a warmth and sympathy coming from Bill. He looks at her in that special way. Sarah's heart occasionally sank with a sweet premonition, but she forbade herself to hope there was no telling what Bill wanted to talk to her about. Could it have anything to do with Deborah? And here she was, daydreaming. Bill drove the car down the suburban highway. On both sides of the road were fields, crops, bushes, and hills. It all looked fantastic in the setting sun. Sarah enjoyed the view and didn't ask any questions. She was having a great time as it was. Finally, Bill parked the car on the curb, got out of the salon, gallantly opened the door in front of Sarah, and extended his hand to her. The scents of stepped grasses warmed by the sun during the day fell on the girl. "Let's climb that hill," Bill said, pointing with his hand. They climbed the hill, and Sarah's mind was swarming with questions. But she realized that Bill would explain everything himself. She didn't want to disturb the silence with her irrepressible curiosity. Soon they were at the top. "I wanted to show you this beauty," the boy said. "Look around." Sarah was breathtakingly surprised by the view. The city was visible from the hill, the blue of the distance in a light haze. Beautiful, big, unfamiliar from this angle. It was beautiful and breathtaking. "Knew you'd appreciate it," Bill said with a smile, looking at the girl. "Thank you. It really is an incredible sight. If we wait until dark, it'll be even more beautiful. The lights will come on. It's beyond description. I often come here to reflect, to relax, but to be alone. This is my place. Now it's yours, too." Sarah realized that Bill was about to say something important. He looked determined. "Sarah, I want to be as honest and straightforward with you as possible," he began. "So you should know that I've been thinking about you ever since we first met." This confession made the girl dizzy and gave her goosebumps. "What happened to me, that story, taught me how to be a good judge of character," Bill went on. "I saw at once what a wonderful person you are. Trustworthy, kind, and sincere. Not just a beautiful girl, but special. Unique. There's no one else like you. And I would very much like to be near you, to protect you, to help you in this life, to see every day your wonderful eyes and kind smile. If you're such a good judge of people," Sarah finally pulled herself together and looked directly into her companion's eyes, "then you must have noticed how I feel about you." "I can feel it," Bill agreed. "But I need to be sure, and that's why I'm having this conversation." "I'm glad you decided to do it," Sarah smiled. Bill understood. He came closer and put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. They stood like that for a long, long time, smiling, silent, alone in the whole world, and looked at the city, which gradually decorated itself with bright running lights.
It seems that everyone, absolutely everyone, when summer vacation comes, goes traveling. And in the fall, during the first days of September, no one has time for lessons. Mildred's classmates tell who has been where, trying to remember the brightest moments and outdo each other. Olin in Thailand rode an elephant. Caleb in Egypt with his parents went on a desert safari, and at night, together with other tourists, climbed Mount Moses to meet the dawn. Emily found Bulgaria boring. Max enjoyed diving in the Red Sea. Mildred was sent to the country every summer. And not even to her own grandmother, but to some seventh water on the vine. And it was especially hurt Mildred could tell her grandmother where Mildred had seen this vegetable garden. These stupid chickens who wanted to peck her hands, and for diving, there was only a river, which the same chickens would wade across. But try telling that to your 7th great-grandmother. Delia Gassman had been the school's vice principal for the last 20 years, and Mildred's parents were particularly fond of it. "I'll rest easy. She'll be able to keep an eye on you," Mom said. She didn't rely on herself. Mom was a forever girl kind of girl. When her father went away on a business trip, Mildred felt like they were having some kind of naughty holiday at home. Mom hated to cook. To stand at the stove for her meant to live her life. Go shopping, carry bags, spend half a day at the stove, then eat everything in 20 minutes, and then feed the toilet. Mom asked from the ceiling as if she were some kind of supreme judge. When Mildred and her mother were alone, it was sandwiches, coffee and ice cream, and movies, some of them better than others, without regard to bedtime. Dad would come home, and everything would go back to normal. Mom would make dinner for 3 days, the family would gather around the table, and at 10 o'clock Mildred would be sent to bed, even if tomorrow was a day off, so her mother secretly reproached herself for her weakness of character if she was so relieved to hand her daughter over to the cold, pedantic hands of Delia Gassman for 3 summer months. In the little room where Mildred was put in by her 7th cousin's grandmother, there wasn't even a door to close. There was a curtain, and in the first days of her arrival, when Mildred wanted to throw up and throw down, she had to restrain herself and behave. What a foreign word it was in her vocabulary. In an honorable manner. Afterward, however, everything was all right. Some summer her friends appeared, and then they were waiting for Mildred to arrive, and no sooner had she taken her things out of her traveling bag than Clarissa and Sami were already peering in at the window. And Delia Gassman was raising her voice. "Oh, the front garden. Flowers. Through the door, please." The girls didn't. They had preferred to stay away from the head teacher since their school days. Clarissa made a gesture with her chin towards the street. "Say, come with us," asked. It took a minute to kick off her shoes and change into sandals. And then a light jumped through the window. The body itself remembered last year's skill, and that was it. Summer had begun. There was internet in the village house. Slow, weak, but it worked. Show me a spot on the map that isn't covered by the World Wide Web. One time Mildred couldn't take it anymore and she jumped. She and the girls trickled into the House of Culture. It was the end of a meeting of the locals, and afterwards they were supposed to show a movie. They were just early. An aunt from the stage was talking tediously about the state of the roads. And behind the girls sat 2 grandmothers, real village old ladies gaunt in scarves. And one was telling the other what her new cell phone could do. "Wait," interrupted the second one. "Do you have Bluetooth or what?" In short, the internet was there. But after a few days it turned out that there was no time for it, because adventures on the 5th point can be found not only on the Mountain of Moses. And if you do not drown in the virtual world, the real world is extreme. Here is the lake at the edge of the village. Long, narrow, curved, half-submerged. Its left end is not that uninteresting, it is even unpleasant. Because the shores are built up, vegetable gardens run down to the water, and you are like in a shop window and constantly disturbing someone. That geese meet to swim, that men after a bath, to swim from the bridge, that deaf grandfather to fish. And you get a beating from everyone, even from. But if you go to the right end of the lake, oh, that's another matter. You have to get there along the shore, along those very little visible paths which to a stranger's eye seem completely unnoticeable, and the thicket itself impenetrable. But you know everything, and there is already a ravine over which there is a bridge, like from a horror movie, at the bottom of the ravine running brook, and the bridge as if the forest built from such old, gaunt trunks and branches that every time you think, I will be the last one who will risk to cross it, under me it, and collapse. But behind the bridge the thicket parted, and the lake lay, enclosed in precipitous banks, and no one around. The forest, looking out of the bushes, a mermaid that looks at you from the depths, although in reality here can appear only cat scientist, and that if Vasca brought from home and tied to a tree. Delia Gassman didn't really keep Mildred in line. The rules to obey were few and simple. No running out for a walk without breakfast. Watch your appearance. Dirty clothes, wash them. Torn clothes, sew them up. After dark, go home. Though Mildred sometimes violated the last rule mercilessly. Otherwise, how could she and the girls walk along the star paths? There were plenty of fireflies in the vicinity of the village. Both Clarissa and Sami had been dismissive of them before. So what if they were bugs with glowing asses? Clarissa said. But when the ordinary road along the field, so dull and dusty by day, so dull and dusty by night, called to Mildred with a witch's light, she was utterly mesmerized. It was as if the night sky was now on every side. The stars twinkled above her head and under her feet. One by one, as if by themselves, fairy stories were born. Mildred did not admit to the girls that she had composed them herself. She said she had read them in books. Her friends listened with their mouths ajar, believing, frightened, and as they did not want to make a fool of themselves, they tried to tell Mildred something comparable about the local countryside. Near Sami began. At the other end of the field, there's the Barzer's garden. They say there used to be a house there before the revolution, where a baron lived. Nothing is left of the house, but you can go to the garden even now. But everything there has been wild for a long time. Shallow and sour. And where the river is, well, where the cape is, you, Clarissa, picked up. There's a dig. The ancient people lived there like monkeys. Archaeologists used to come there, digging in the ground. It's all broken crockery, pots and pans, as if they were always fighting with each other and throwing dishes. There's a dead man lying further away. Sami inserted. There the earth has crumbled a little and a grave has appeared. But it's not scary, it's ancient. And you can't even dig it up yet because you need some special permission. Clarissa was silent for a moment, and then she said as if she were revealing a secret. The scary ones are werewolves. Mo, come on, Mildred couldn't take it anymore. It's all understandable, the movies, Twilight. Tell me about the vampires. But Clarissa was neither embarrassed nor angry, but said even sadly, it's not me, that's what the grown-ups say. Well, yes, I know that you have hunting grounds here, and at the edge of the forest, there is a banner saying that hunting is forbidden. Just imagine, one hunter says to another, let's go, maybe we'll get lucky today and kill a couple werewolves. Sami usually giggled at every occasion, but she didn't. Clarissa began to explain, it's a shame we don't have any tall houses here to climb up and see, except for the water tower, but it's locked, and you have to get in. If you look from up high, you can see a mountain behind the forest, and behind it, no one's been going there for a long time. At first, they wouldn't let us in. Just some men in uniform stood there and wouldn't let them in. They said there was some treasure hidden there. Sami was in a hurry to say, as if there was a treasure in the mountain itself, and then either the treasure ended. What do you mean, ran out? Clarissa's voice was irritated. Or it was found and taken away, or it never existed at all. The thing is, there's a place down there where werewolves live. That's where they keep people safe from them. Because they could attack like wolves. If someone alone or in pairs wandered into those parts, Mildred was tempted to give up. It was all right to lie, but don't lie too much. It's one thing when she talks about distant galaxies and aliens. It's clear fantasy. Fairy tales, that's also understandable. Things of bygone, you can even tickle your nerves. Imagine that on the eve of Ivan Cupola mermaids, lounging on the shore, bathing in the moonlight. But do not go to the forest because you don't even have ordinary wolves here, said Mildred. Why are you inventing some for the first time in her memory? She felt that Clarissa was offended. She was the bravest of the three of them, not afraid to swim in the river, even though it had whirlpools and eddies. She could go into the garden at night, but here, apparently, her courage was at an end. Something prevented her from crossing the line, and Mildred's careless remark poked at the sore spot. Clarissa wanted to change the subject, but she couldn't. "We can get closer," she said with a challenge. "We can get to Red Lake, and then I'll show you the..." Mildred wasn't going to go there, and she wasn't allowed to go any farther, and she knew from Clarissa's tone that it would be a long walk. "It's no big deal. Come on, let's just look. And we won't get lost. It's concrete. When you're tired, turn back and that's it. If it's hot, you can go swimming in the lake. And of animals, the worst is if you meet a wild boar. Let's go." Clarice seemed to be on fire herself, me, characterized by her ability to soften sharp corners. Again, found an option. "There's plenty of strawberries. We can take some Biden jars with us. I could either make it between breakfast and lunch or between lunch and dinner," Mildred thought, already giving up. Otherwise, grandmother would make me stay home for 3 days. But no matter what they thought, it was not possible to set out until the afternoon. "This morning I was captain of the potato field," complained Mildred, "and it's just endless. And every bush has to be looked under the tail, weed and perch. To mother on the boat, 'Why do people need so many potatoes, eh?' The girls only giggled. They took such labor for granted. At first the road seemed very beautiful to Mildred. She had never been here before, and everything fascinated her. There was the meadow drowned in flowers, the bridge over the river where she could linger and watch the flocks of fish scurrying under the water, and the unusually picturesque withered tree on the other side of the river, which looked like the figure of a huge witch from a distance. But at the end of the second hour of the journey, my legs were tired and my impressions lacked freshness. There was indeed a concrete track under my feet, long ago laid slabs, partly buried in the ground and overgrown with grass. The road turned and again rushed forward, and on the sides was the same forest. "Yeah, hadn't we had enough?" Mildred was the first to ask. "We've got a long way to go. Let's just rest a little." "Wait, there will be a lake now," Sammy reassured her. "This is the last place where people from our village go fishing. Further, no. And why is it red?" Mildred asked without much interest. She was too tired. "Is there any special water here?" "Nope. There used to be a village nearby, and it was called so. Beautiful, I mean. But the lake is just an ordinary lake. And it's not very nice to swim here. Only in one place, but the shores are too boggy." Then they saw motorcycles at the edge of the road, a sign that the fishermen were really here. "Let's go farther away," Clarissa suggested. "They're fishing, and we'll swim." One of her grandmother's injunctions was not to swim in strange places. But it was so hot and they wanted to get into the cool water. When they came to the lake, a small lake lost in the woods, Clarissa raised her eyebrows. "I haven't been here for a long time. I don't remember. Let's find this beach. Let's go one to the left, one to the right along the shore." Mildred went to the left, not noticing that Sammy obediently stepped to the right, behind Clarissa. There were no paths here. Only the shore of the lake could serve as a landmark. Mildred walked and looked for the place where the shores were overgrown with reeds and where there would be sand. She knew from experience that here, in the silence, every sound traveled far. Either she would call the girls, or they would call her. Here, the coastal bushes parted, the shallow water opened, and the sand on the shore was white. "Where?" cried Mildred. But there was absolute silence. No one answered her. That ringing silence, when it feels like you're alone in the world, it just couldn't be. Mildred knew she had not gone far. Well, 10 minutes, no more, as she wandered alone along the shore. At most, the girls had gone the same distance, but in the other direction. It's not that you can't shout to each other, you can hear each other call, but there are still fishermen. It could not be. So it was necessary to take control and calm down. And then when she and the girls would meet, all together they would laugh at the fact that the fearless girl from the city was so scared in the first minutes when she was left alone. Even impossible to get lost here. Even though there was no path, the lake shore was right there. You just had to face it. If she went to the left, she would have to go back to the right. That's all, so Mildred said to herself. But as she looked around the lake and its shore, she saw no sign that people were near. It was the same silence, the shores overgrown with reeds, and a sky that was beginning to frown. It looked like a thunderstorm was just walk. Just walk, Mildred said to herself. Walk and think of nothing. And everything will end right now. If not on the girls, then on these men fishermen I'll definitely come across. She walked on, but nothing, exactly nothing, was happening. Tired, scratched against branches and twigs, sweaty and bruised, Mildred was ready to cry. Finally, she realized that the impossible had happened. She was lost. Mildred tried to remember the map. Several times she and the girls had looked at the satellite map on her cell phone, figuring out what was around and where else to go. It looked like the forest stretched for many kilometers, but that was only if you stood. Again, facing the lake, and on all other sides there were villages quite close to each other, to reach at least the concrete road or the river. There is no fear there. The river will sooner or later lead to another village. If not today, then tomorrow. Mildred shuddered as she imagined spending the night alone in the forest. But if there was no way out, well, maybe she would have to. There are no large animals here, only wild boars. They don't eat people. It seems there are also vipers. He and the girls almost stepped on one. They were running to the river, and it was crawling across the road. It was like a trickle of black water. Vipers are not so poisonous that they can kill you. Nothing will happen to her, Mildred. If it's too scary, you can stay awake. Just sit somewhere and wait till dawn. The thing is, she was desperately scared right now. So much so that she didn't even think about how worried her grandmother would be and what panic her parents would feel when she told them. And grandmother would tell them. For now, Mildred feared only for herself. She decided to walk until dark, and then she would see. And perhaps she should have made as much noise as possible. It would scare away the forest predators, are there lynxes here or not, and maybe attract people's attention. But how to make noise? Shouting, perhaps singing would be better. Mildred coughed and sang, and almost immediately, she didn't even realize how it happened. It was as if the spasm that had been gripping her throat until now had finally released. Her voice changed, became rich, sonorous, ringing with silver notes. Never had she sung like that. If it had been a large concert hall instead of a vast forest, Mildred's voice would have filled every corner of it. She sang everything. The simple songs she had learned at school, in music class, and those she had heard on television. Her own voice encouraged her and supported her and even made her a little dizzy. And then he saw it. On a small hill overgrown with hazel trees sat a wolf and listened to her intently. There was no doubt in her mind that it was a wolf. It is not true that these predators are called gray, and they also say eyes smart like a man. No six was not gray, but multicolored, iridescent. There you have brown and silver and almost white, and the look. He wasn't just intelligent, he was wise. Beastly wisdom, much older than humans. It must have been a scout wolf, because they usually hunt in packs. Or families, like in Mowgli. For a moment, Mildred tried to remember everything she knew about wolves, and then realized it was useless. Despair gripped her. She didn't know how to climb trees. There was no other way to escape, but there was already a man standing next to the wolf. It was a young man, maybe a few years older than Mildred. The wolf was not a werewolf, had not taken on human form. The young man put his hand on its scruff and just stood there. Maybe Mildred should have been more frightened. A meeting in the woods with a stranger could have far more terrible consequences than a fleeting acquaintance with a predator. But the girl did not think about it. She was relieved. "Oh, what are you doing here?" The young man asked in surprise. "Looking," said Mildred. "I lost my..." He thought for a few moments, then nodded. "It happens here. Are you from..." Mildred heard the name of a familiar village and nodded. "You won't make it back tonight." He said, "Come, you'll spend the night at our place, and tomorrow I'll take you." "Who's your place?" Her fear was awake in her again, and the question gave it away. "We live nearby, our village. Come on, your mother will feed you." Until now, Mildred hadn't thought she was hungry. But now, and really did she have a choice? Only to trust this boy. He was about 15 or 16 years old by the looks of it. He would have been very handsome, blue-eyed with correct features. The only thing that spoiled him was the scar across his lips. But his hair was good, golden, curly, in a lush cap. I guess he didn't like the barber shop. "Follow me," the young man said to Mildred. and so calmly went to the thicket as if the thought that he could get lost did not even cross his mind. Is it, Wolf?" Mildred asked timidly. He turned around. "A couple of years ago, my father's dog ran away into the woods in the spring and apparently walked with a wolf. They wanted to drown the puppies, saying they wouldn't grow into anything good, only chickens. But I didn't let them. Now no dog can compare to him. A hunter's dream, a circo. Don't worry, he won't hurt anyone unless I tell him to." Peter followed the boy, but she walked with all her might and could not adjust to his steps. They were too flying, and the new acquaintance felt something. He stopped, waited for Mildred, and took her hand. His palm was very stiff. "Oh, and why do you say that this happens here?" The girl asked. "It's a special place," he explained. "It has happened many times before. A man goes on his way, but he comes out in the place from which he started. Or he gets lost, and God knows where he comes out." Mildred thought that she would have nothing against going back to the place from which she had set out on this crazy journey. Her grandmother's house. "Why do you come here yourself?" she asked. "If it's so dangerous here." He turned around and grinned slightly with mangled lips. "And we are local. It doesn't touch us. We're well, to put it simply, the old believers. We have a different faith. That's why we live in a special way. It started with my great-grandfather that didn't quite understand what he was talking about. But she was much calmer now than before. She clung to the hand of her new acquaintance, and somehow it happened that now she was not afraid of the forest with all its predators and the approaching night. Even her legs seemed to have stopped whining. Only she was more and more hungry. Circo trudged ahead without looking back. "You sing well," said the young man. "I've never heard anyone sing like that before." "None of ours. Only once on the radio. We can't have all that. TV, radio. I was in town with my grandfather. I heard it there by chance." "Oh, I've never heard it before." Madrid wanted to explain that she'd never thought she had any ability before. And she wasn't very good at music lessons. But then the forest parted and the new acquaintance. Here we are." Mildred thought it was a movie. It was a tiny village, maybe a dozen or so houses, all log houses, none of them stone. There were such houses where her grandmother lived too, but many of them were abandoned, with empty windows. The villagers dismantled the abandoned huts and sometimes even burned them. Here there was not a single abandoned house. It was obvious that everyone was taken, and her new acquaintance hadn't lied to her, hadn't led her to a remote place. People lived here. The grandfather, thin, gray-bearded but sturdy, called out to them in surprise. "My, Vince, who have you brought?" "The girl has lost her way." The young man raised his voice. "I'll take her home tomorrow." He turned to his companion. What's your name?" "Mildred." Vincent had only one mother. His father died last year. The mother, a burly woman with a pleasant, good-natured face, was even more amazed when she saw Mildred. "Lord, so little and so far gone." "Well, where have you gone from home, my dear?" "She didn't go that far," Vincent explained. "She was just at the lake with her friends." Her mother was silent and nodded understandingly. She fed Mildred, and Mildred thought she had never had such delicious borscht, and the porridge with mushrooms was good too. And the tea, strange in Mildred's mind, was not even tea at all but just brewed herbs and honey, the like of which she had never tasted before, green as an emerald. With this kind woman by her side, Mildred became quite calm. Aunt Grace, as the owner introduced herself, then lamented that Mildred's relatives must be going crazy. The child was missing, then asked the girl not to make such distant trips or just stroked her head. "As soon as it's dawn, Vince will take you back," Aunt Grace reassured her. "I feel sorry for your grandmother today. What a night it will be for her." "Maybe she'll realize I've come to see you," Mildred suggested. "It's been a long time since anyone's been here. I think people have forgotten we live here. Either we are here or we are not." Mildred remembered her friends telling her legends about werewolves, which, of course, didn't exist. Maybe the memory that there were humans in the forest had become distorted and had given rise to these stories. "Don't tell anyone about us either," Aunt Grace said, "or the curious will start coming here, and we don't want them to." She made Mildred's bed in a separate corner behind the stove. She showed her where to wash up and brought her nightgown. "Don't you ever go anywhere from here." Mildred's eyes were drooping. but curiosity still got the better of her. The girl thought that even this bed, on which she was now settled, an iron bed with a frame net, not here, in this remote village made, why? Our men come, they bring it to us when we need something. But they rarely come out. Journalists came here, it happened. Someone tipped them off. But for us, this fame is worse than a bitter radish. Leave us to live with God alone. Aunt Grace said something else, but Mildred was almost asleep. Still, she heard people still knocking at the hut. They came asking about the girl, that is, about her. Apparently, the appearance of the little guest was a big event. It seemed to Mildred that Aunt Grace touched her shoulder as soon as she closed her eyes. "It's dawning," she said. "Come on, it's time to go home." Vince was already waiting for her, sitting at the table. Aunt Grace fed them both, poured a large mug of milk, and cut some bread. Mildred thought of the few times she and her grandmother had sat like this, by candlelight, when the power went out in the village. Not only her legs, but her whole body ached from yesterday's walk, and Mildred was preparing herself for a long walk today. "Maybe all day," Zian said. "Are you eating well?" Aunt Grace asked. "Oh, it's kind of the first time I've tried it." Mildred tried to sing something and was amazed. She didn't have any special voice. I mean, just her usual squeaky voice, the kind of voice that made the music teacher wave his hand hopelessly. No sooner had Mildred thought she must be in a bad way than Aunt Grace said, "Oh, it happens. So it's a gift from above, but not forever. But at times like this," which she put her arm around Mildred and crossed her. "Well, go child, go children." That was the end of the village for her. There was no reprimand, only the tears of her mother and grandmother. Her father, who had turned black and gray that night, as if he had suffered a serious illness, and the triumph of those who were part of the search party, because they had found the girl alive, and in such a short time, Mildred was not even allowed to talk to her friends. Clarissa and Sammy looked at her guiltily from behind other people's backs, made some signs, but Mildred never managed to tell them what had happened to her. In fact, she told no one the truth. Somehow it happened that she got lost. She knew that the forests were vast. She thought she would never get out, but luckily she heard the voices of the rescuers. At night in the forest was very scary. It's good that summer nights are that's all anyone who tried to question her learned from her. A day later, Mildred was taken to town. Her frivolous mother had certainly grown up during that terrible 24 hours. She took a vacation, and until the 1st of September she never left her daughter's side, except to hold her hand. "God showed me what could happen," the unbelieving mother repeated. "Thank God everything was all right." Then school started. It was good that it was literally in the yard. Otherwise, probably, Mom would have quit to take her daughter to classes and to meet her when the lessons are over. School and English class, that was it. Mildred was not allowed to go anywhere else alone. She was allowed to bring her friends, as many as she wanted and whenever she wanted, to surf the internet even 24 hours a day, to listen to music without headphones, but only at home. Her parents took her out on weekends. Mildred didn't remember that before they went somewhere like this, the whole family, to the movies or the water park, out of town for a picnic or to a big shopping mall. The three of them went on vacation together now. And for the remaining 2 summer months, Mildred was sent to camp, where the teachers kept an eye on their charges and counted them by their heads. All this ended when Mildred graduated from high school and entered the institute. She liked English, she wanted to study the language, and she could not imagine any other way for herself. Her parents had to realize that the former control over her was the girl was preparing for exhausting explanations with her mother, for attempts to appeal to reason, but something happened that she hadn't expected. Her father had left the family. It was so trivial. He met a young woman, almost the same age as his daughter, and the sober, punctual, ultra-responsible father who had been the captain of their family ship all these years had abandoned the vessel to the waves. Mildred expected it to be a terrible blow to her mother. She would become depressed, perhaps even go into bed, but she could not suppose that her mother, determined to prove everything to everybody, would marry within a year. Her father had left the apartment to his ex-wife and daughter. Her mother's new boyfriend had moved in with them, and Mildred felt superfluous. She liked studying very much. She was one of the best in the course. She realized at the time of studenthood This is a prolonged childhood. Still, she dreamed of the time when she would start working, and immediately, on her first paycheck, she would rent an apartment, even the smallest, simplest. But from that day on, her own life would begin as she saw it. However, even here, everything did not go according to Mildred's scenario. First of all, she saw herself as a translator of fiction, but she couldn't find such a place. But where she was willingly taken, it is in school. A teacher of English. The constant staff turnover in pedagogy led to the fact that the director met a girl with no experience almost with open arms. But Mildred only lasted 6 months. As a subject teacher, she was good. The boys could learn a lot from her. But when it came to discipline, she couldn't bring the students to order. They could do anything but English in class. Crouched down. The boys ran between the rows, did their math homework, ate the ice cream they raced to the kiosk for at recess, and talked to each other without lowering their voices. When Mildred returned home, her head was buzzing and tears came to her eyes from her own helplessness. Her salary was so small that it was clear that if she rented an apartment, she would have to starve because she had no strength for a part-time job. So when Mildred saw the ad, she thought she was dreaming. A well-to-do family was looking for an English teacher for a boy of 10. Living in the countryside, of course, housing was provided, decent conditions, including food. The ad was already 3 days old, and Mildred had no doubt she was late. Still, she sent an email since the advertiser preferred messages rather than calls. Beard wasn't hoping for anything. She had almost no seniority, and she didn't give the impression of being too serious. A short, thin girl of 24, painfully shy and insecure. She was all the more startled when the bell rang and a man's voice invited her to go for an interview. Mildred squeaked. Why should she? You can start work and then we'll see. No, just like that. You don't know anything about me. Darling, these days, thanks to the internet, you can find out a lot about a person. So you're welcome to come, unless you've changed your mind. Mildred's new master. How strange it was to hear the word master. Probably employer was better. Was called Aaron Jaeger. For the first time, the girl decided to go without her things, and without saying anything at home, she felt that her mother would awaken her old fears, and she would not let her go. Mildred herself would hardly have found this place if it hadn't been for the cab driver with his navigator. And he'd never been here before. Winter forest, narrow road. It was not far from the village where Mildred used to spend her summers, but up. Wow, said the cab driver when they finally reached the village. They've built a real castle. It was a very beautiful house, not unlike the mansions of the new Russians. They seemed to boast of their wealth, no matter that taste was often sacrificed. This house, on the other hand, looked as if it had stepped out of the pages of a fairy tale about the Middle Ages. It wasn't that big, but it breathed harmony. Everything was in place. The turrets, the stained glass windows, the small balconies, no bigger than swallows' nests. And even the fence, which resembled metal lace topped with sharp peaks. Wait for me, please, said Mildred to the taxi driver. I won't be long, I guess. I can't get out of here alone. Wait, I'll pay. She was sure that, having seen her with her own eyes, Aaron Lovovich would, of course, refuse her immediately. And she also had no doubt that in such a large house there were, of course, servants. Probably these women were better dressed than herself, and they would look at her with contempt. She was opened by an elderly man with an unassuming, unrecognizable face. Oh, I know, he said. When Mildred tried to explain who she was, you are expected, come along. Inside, everything was decorated in the same old-fashioned way. She wanted to go up the stairs to see what the castle was like on the upper floors. But she was led down a hall, and a servant opened a heavy oak door. It was a study, with bookshelves to the ceiling, a massive desk on which, however, stood something very far from antique, a laptop computer. And then a man rose from behind the desk, and Mildred forgot all about it. Why, he looks like a young devil. Flashed through her mind, if devils can be young, devilish character or not. There was something of Mephistopheles about him, very tall and very thin, all angular of some sort. The man greeted them with a lush black hair curled in fine, chemical curls, jagged, expressive eyebrows, and light green eyes so bright it was as if he wore lenses, a black suit, and a smile from ear to ear. Aaron Jaeger was good-looking, but it was the beauty of an engraving. No softness, just sharp edges. Here you are, he said. I'm glad. He shook both of Mildred's hands and seemed slow to release them. The servant was no longer in the study. I wanted to talk about work. She reminded him hurriedly, trying to make the awkward situation end sooner. He released her hands at last, but kept smiling. I'll introduce you to the boy now. Have I already told you that he is ill? No, cerebral palsy, as they say. Cerebral palsy. His ex-wife left him to me, and I didn't want Vivian to suffer in an institution. So he'll get everything he needs at home. Does he have other teachers? Mildred felt the ground beneath her feet, and Jaeger shook his head. One at a time. I don't want to overload him. The boy is weak, you'll see. Last year he took literature, this year English, and so on. Come on, I'll show you around. Including your room. They're waiting for me. Mildred did not say that it was only a cab. She wanted to leave herself an escape route. I have to come back today to get my things. Aaron Jaeger raised his eyebrow. Good. Let it be just a short tour then. I'll show you the apprentice first. That's when they finally climbed the stairs. And Mildred thought that Aaron Jaeger could easily walk 3 steps. Please, the master opened the door for her, as the servant had done before. Mildred thought at first that there was no one in the spacious, bright room. An invalid's chair by the table, with its back to the door. Then she caught sight of a pale. Aaron Jaeger turned the chair around in one graceful, dancing movement, and Mildred saw a boy who was not even 10, but 7 years old. Round, ugly glasses, a pale, almost transparent face, and a detached look. The child looked through Mildred and did not react when Aaron Jaeger noisily introduced him to the girl and her to her future pupil. True, the boy nodded politely so that hardly anyone could reproach him for anything. But Mildred had to take the initiative. Do you want to study English? She asked the boy affectionately, putting her hand on his shoulder, and she felt that sharp shoulder shudder under his hand. And again that indifferent, polite nod. I can say English, or Chinese, or Synchrofasatron, and of course I can't help showing you to your room. Aaron Jaeger walked in front of her, back to front, still smiling with his 32 teeth. Please, never had Mildred thought she would be living in a tower. In a small, almost circular room, where all day long the sun went from one window to another, and at night the same route was taken by the month. The bed, even from afar, seemed soft and very comfortable, and how glorious it would be to read in that ancient armchair, sitting by the window. Well, no one will disturb you here. Aaron Jaeger was glad as a boy when Mildred said she would move in tomorrow. In fact, for minutes he seemed younger than his little son. At any rate, there was much more emotion and spontaneity in him. Mildred kept her word. When she returned home, she had been packing all evening. The distances were quite long, and if she had forgotten something, it would not be easy to drive to get it. Then she called her mom and told her she had started a new job. She'd be living in the country. And now, if they decided to meet, they would have to make arrangements in advance. Mom, with her usual curiosity, tried to find out all the details, but Mildred could not tell her much yet. A sick boy, small, sweet, whom she would teach. A salary far above what she had gotten at her old. Is this boy's father married? Mom asked, hitting the mark, as always. Tu registers? So if the man is nice and rich, don't waste your time. Try to glue him together, her mother advised, completely ignoring the fact that Mildred had no experience in gluing. As she fell asleep, she thought about how to show herself at the new place with the best side and what methodology to teach English to the boy, whose strength seems to be enough only to live a little. In the first few weeks of work, Mildred was still surprised at Vivian's behavior. He seemed to regard lessons as an unpleasant chore that could not be avoided. He had no special aptitude for language, but he studied faithfully everything Mildred assigned him. And if he had been an ordinary schoolboy, he would have earned a solid B. He did not try to distract the teacher. Didn't make small talk with her. He answered the questions asked, and that was all. Sometimes Mildred herself, on her own initiative, tried to ask him about his father, about his mother, but received meager one-word answers. The boy did not seem to long for his mother, though she had left the family not long ago. Nor did he seem to be happy about his father, though Aaron Jaeger dropped by a couple of times during classes. and all the furnishings around spoke of how he spoiled his son. Expensive furniture, specially adapted for the disabled, toys that Mildred had never seen in stores. Probably they were sent from abroad, but Vivian was completely indifferent to these luxuries. Not once did Mildred catch him playing. The same could not be said of his father. Indifference did not apply to Aaron Jaeger. He was a lump of energy and emotion. At first, Mildred thought that in his house she would fall into the category of servants, but the owner behaved with her more like a guest. They dined and dined together, with a large dining room, and Aaron Jaeger always entertained Mildred, most often with stories of his travels. He had traveled all over the world, paying particular attention to Southeast Asia with its exotic tradition, and he was an excellent storyteller. A real artist. Mildred tried to talk to Vivian, to ask him about his travels, but the boy only shrugged his shoulders. He doesn't take me anywhere. Vivian rarely even said the word father. Mildred was getting more and more accustomed to Aaron Jaeger and looked forward to meeting him at the table. They all ate breakfast separately. More often than not, Mildred came down to the kitchen while Pete, the servant who had opened the door for her, was gathering breakfast for the boy on a tray. It was always the same: a mug of oatmeal on a white plate, an egg in a special silver shot glass, and apple juice. Mildred poured herself a strong cup of coffee, took a cookie from the vase, and went back up to her tower to enjoy it all. And her room, well, pure Middle Ages, like in a museum. And the first rays of sunlight that lay on the floorboards, and the boundless forest that stretched around the castle, and excellent coffee, which not only made her heart beat faster, but seemed to grow wings behind her back. Then Mildred tutored the boy. She showed him cartoons or simple children's movies in English, translating them briefly, and trying to make him understand the characters. Often by lunchtime, Aaron Jaeger was free, and sometimes Mildred did not even notice that she was eating, engrossed in conversation with him. It had been a long time since she had felt that another person was so interested in her, unless it had been her parents when she was a child. But that had been different, and more often in the evening, Aaron Jaeger would ask her out. It meant that they would go by car far away, to the city. Mildred had never been to those famous restaurants before. What was the point of going there alone? And it was very expensive. Had never sat in the best seats in the theater. She realized that the master should not have such relations with his son's teacher, that Aaron Jaeger was openly courting her, and consoled herself with her mother's admonition, "Don't be a fool, glue him together." It seemed to be the first time she'd ever done it, and Mildred was getting uncomfortable with Vivian. Perhaps the boy would have to explain sooner or later that she and his father had a special relationship. Somehow he would react to that. Mildred had dreamt of the young man who lived in the woods from time to time. She had never been so at ease with anyone as with him, as if nothing bad could happen to her in his presence. Now Vince came to her in her dreams less and less often compared to Aaron Jaeger. Everyone else seemed surprisingly bland. It would be boring to be around them. When Aaron Jaeger proposed to her, Mildred had thought she had said yes to him a long time ago. As it turned out, it was her turn to be the first to tell Vivian, as well as the fact that after the wedding, a very modest family affair, they would go on a trip. The two of them, of course. Aaron had told her yesterday. Perhaps he thought the boy's presence would be a burden to her. Mildred worried how Vivian would take it, but the boy only fluttered his long eyelashes. He averted his eyes immediately, as if he didn't want the teacher to read anything in his gaze. He remained silent for a moment, and then said, quite unexpectedly, to her, Has he shown you his collection yet?" Mildred was so surprised that Vivian had spoken to her on his own initiative that the meaning of the phrase came to her a little later. "Oh, collection? No, what are you talking about?" He jerked his chin, showing that he did not want to continue the conversation on this subject, and began to read the English words again. Clearly, audibly, but without any expression, purely mechanically. It seemed that the foreign language was still as foreign to him as ever, in spite of Mildred's best efforts. Neither Aaron Jaeger nor his chosen one wanted to organize anything like a modern wedding, with a restaurant, guests and forgive me, a toastmaster. Mildred even informed her parents that she was married after the fact. As a wedding present, Aaron gave her a very beautiful lace dress, which, as Mildred suspected, was unthinkably expensive. They were married at the registry office in the presence of a couple of his friends, who Mildred saw for the first time that day. One of these friends drove the newlyweds to the airport. They spent 2 weeks in the Seychelles, and Mildred, who had never traveled abroad until then, was utterly enchanted. And the islands, some of which remained uninhabited, and the friendliness of the locals, with whom she easily found a common language, and the cuisine. She had never tasted such outlandish dishes, and what to say? Her love, as she thought that for the first time in her life really loved. One thing that surprised her was that in these 2 weeks, Erin had never once thought of her son. Mildred herself thought of the boy much more often. She browsed the local stores for souvenirs that might appeal to Vivian. She worried about whether Pete was taking good care of him, whether the servant would know what to do if the boy got worse. She even called Vivian, surprising her husband. But when she heard the boy's calm, polite, and cold tone, just as she always did, she called herself a fool and abandoned thoughts of her ward for the time being. She didn't want to go back terribly. It was as if there had been one life perfectly fairy tale-like on the islands, and the other seemed like a dream. Did crowded cities and cold weather still exist? The departure seemed to Mildred like the expulsion of Adam and Eve from paradise. She was comforted by the fact that the castle was now her home, and that in a sense the prose of her days was when they returned. Mildred carried a huge bag of presents to Vivian. She really missed the boy. She wanted to hug him, ruffle his hair, and she told herself it was a good thing the child was becoming her own. But the boy didn't seem to have any intention of changing his attitude toward her. He thanked Mildred politely, but was in no hurry to get the boxes and bags. It was like he didn't care. "Oh, are you feeling all right?" he asked anxiously. It seemed to her that the child had lost even more weight and turned pale. And she decided to tell Erin something should be thought of for Vivian as well. Maybe some kind of sanatorium, even in another country. For that matter, I'd have to find out. There must be some. Like summer camps, but for kids with special needs. You can't raise a boy so he can't socialize with his peers. But that evening, just as she was about to start this conversation, her husband turned to her. "I would like to show you something very dear to me." And Mildred was frankly surprised. She thought she had seen everything in the castle already. And at the same time, she involuntarily remembered Vivian's phrase. "Has he shown you his collection before?" "What?" she asked with a smile. "Let's go." He took her hand and lifted her from the table in one strong movement, and drew her after him with the eagerness of a child who wants to show her something. The most beautiful thing in his opinion. They walked to the wing of the castle where Mildred had hitherto been least often seen. But the smile still remained on her lips. She was preparing herself for anything. A collection, but what could he collect? Such an unusual man. He'd do it, maybe gems or even meteorites, wine, shells, anything. This corridor seemed quite short, and there was only one door in it. This time Erin didn't bother to let it go through. He unlocked the lock, stepped into the room first, turned on the light, and only then said to Mildred, "Come in." It took her a moment to realize what she was seeing. When she did not rush away because her feet were stuck to the floor. At first she thought the room had glass walls. But no, they were terrariums, floor to ceiling, standing side by side. And they were all brightly lit now, and inside, it didn't even seem like the spawn of nightmares. She'd never had such terrible dreams. Huge spiders of all colors lived their lives here. The movements of their legs so fast, so elusive. Black, glossy, shiny, with patterns on their backs, and spiders whose legs were like bones stripped of flesh, and furry monsters that seemed, but it was impossible, to stare right at her. And snakes, too, of all colors and sizes in such close proximity that the sheen of their scales hypnotized Mildred. Even a cobra seemed to be there, just a hand's reach away, and some other insects, too. Strange ones she'd never seen before. Erin's smile would have outshone the sun if he hadn't looked like one of his pets. That huge spider. She'd never thought of such a comparison before. "Oh, I have the most dangerous creatures on the planet here," he informed her, glowering and not noticing that Mildred was paralyzed with terror. He continued almost enthusiastically. Yes, the cobra, the king cobra. After its bite without antidote, 60% of people die. It can even kill an elephant. And this one's even better. Look how good Tipan McCoy is. It'll offer a whole cocktail of paralysis and death. There's no more poisonous creature, spiders, now that's just the black widow. Its bite is not to be feared except for children and the elderly. For them, it can be fatal. Another thing is the traveler spider. That's the one that'll give you paralysis, and this one's a real cutie. You can hold it in your hands. And grabbed a huge spider covered in bright blue hairs out of the terrarium. The last thing Mildred thought before consciousness left her was, I want to die before this thing touches her. Didn't think she could cry so much. Desperate sobs are like a thunderstorm. They come and they pass. And she sat there, trying to breathe inaudibly, not to sob, and the tears kept pouring. She could only cry. What else could she do? Now the scandal she had tried to make seemed ridiculous to her. She had never been able to swear before, and now she tried it. To her misfortune, I can't live with these things in the same house, she said to her husband, letting him know it was a final ultimatum. And he just smiled at her like a child. You see how far away they are, how securely locked up. You won't see them again if you don't want to. And I've never had much luck in my life. I've never met a woman who wasn't afraid of spiders. It's not because you locked them up tight. It's that gun that hangs on the wall that's bound to go off someday, once every 100 years, but you forget to lock the door and someone will escape. That's no more likely than one of us getting killed by lightning. But Mildred, who had never fainted before in her life, could not forget what she had seen. Those countless moving paws whose movements she could not foresee. Those cold, fixed eyes, those rustles. I can't live here, she said, more convinced of this than of anything else in the world. Either move your collection to some other place, or I'll leave here. But my dear, that's impossible, he said curtly, and at the same time with a force that did not yield to her protest. Mildred did not even bother to ask why. One thing she realized was that he valued his collection as much as, and probably more than, she did. Then I'll call my father and ask him to pick me up. Mildred mentioned her father unconsciously. At that moment it seemed to her that she had no other people left but her parents. And wouldn't she ask her mother? She seldom disturbed her father, but now it was worthwhile. He would be able to talk to her husband, man to man. I'll call, she repeated, and only smiled radiantly. But he thought she saw a cold, sparkling madness in his. The phone was out of place. Not in her purse, not under the pillow where she'd put it at night, not in the bathroom. Mildred searched the whole room, realizing more and more clearly that she would never find it. She wanted to talk to her husband immediately, but she was afraid to look for him. What if she saw the door to the east wing ajar? What if he came out of there with one of his favorite pets in his arm? He must be of the same blood as them, and not afraid to take them in his arms. The rage that was flooding her soul was looking for an outlet. So a woman who hates the drunkenness of her husband, once again seeing him in a hangover, ready to attack him. But she said, wait, now it is useless to talk to him. When he sobers, and Mildred now wanted to say that she would not stay here a minute, that she herself will file for divorce. But the silence in the house told, wait till he comes to you himself. She walked up and down the stairs and down the hallways until at last she saw her husband in the study. You would have thought he had been working on his laptop for a long time. He seemed completely absorbed in what he was writing, but Mildred knew he hadn't been here a quarter of an hour ago. Where's my cell phone? She asked from the doorway. Don't tell me you didn't take it. Suddenly he chuckled, as if he were playing an extremely funny joke, a practical joke. He giggled and couldn't stop. And she suddenly realized how dependent she was on him. That's okay if need be. She'll walk away. Aaron could barely get it out. Buzzling has your phone. He decided to call too. Who has it? She was stunned. Boomslang. That's the snake I brought back from the Seychelles. You didn't even notice. And no one noticed even on the airplane. Oh, there are ways. You can't imagine how beautiful it is. It's got these big green eyes that no human being can match, and she's so sly. All the locals know, and I know, that its poison is deadly. Only 3 milligrams is enough. There was no escape from this snake before, and the antidote is only now available. But this sly one, my husband was choking with laughter. It can grab you with a dry bite. That is, just prick you with its teeth, without injecting me. DUNU a rush, go crazy. Demand serum and blood transfusion, although you really nothing threatening. Conversely, if the snake bites for real, it could be hours before you feel symptoms. Your blood vessels will already be destroyed, and then stroke and death. Also, God forbid you mistake a baby boomslang for a juvenile. The former is harmless, whereas the latter, boom, and that's it. He will guard your cell phone very well, I assure you, and you won't. Try to take it away. That sly little thing is so possessive. What falls to her is gone. Put her hands over her ears. It seemed to her that she would go mad at the mere sound of that voice, in which there was no human intonation left, only to leave immediately, even if she didn't take anything with her to run or to crawl, but to leave. But Aaron had not finished his game yet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something. First, he showed a clenched fist. Then he opened it. In the palm of his hand was and the door is locked. He almost sang out, enjoying the fact that everything had succeeded. But Mildred began, and you mustn't spite me, he said, suddenly serious, or I'm afraid one of my pets will bite you. And then you'll be hovering around me like a bird to get me to give you the cure. Oh, I'd rather die, Mildred promised. Did she think that the only person she would be able to talk to here would be the little boy who had been so annoyed by her presence? When she came to Vivian and sat down in a chair beside him, utterly murdered, crying, and not even trying to make conversation about English, the boy was drawing. For a minute, they were both silent. Then he said, without turning his head, "Oh, I see, he showed you his collection. How do you live here?" Mildred asked suddenly to herself, "I don't know how I can sleep in this house now. I'll feel as if someone were climbing on the blanket, getting close to my face." Vivian colored in his drawing of the sky, pressing hard on the blue crayon. "Oh, you'll get used to it," he said at last. Judy Seabury shook her head, which obviously meant no. Then she asked, "Aren't you afraid of them at all?" "Oh, look at my door." It was the first time she'd noticed this self-evidently internet detail. It was only when she looked more closely that she noticed that the door, together with the jamb, represented something special. Mildred went over and closed it. "All right." And there was a threshold on the floor. Not even a How did he agree to put one of those in for you? She pondered aloud, not realizing that she was calling her husband he as if he were a stranger. It's just that he knows that if he wants to, he'll bring anyone here himself. Outwardly, Vivian's voice remained as calm. Does he take them in his hands? He has these gloves, like metal gloves, like some kind of flexible alloy. I don't know, elbow high. And yeah, he takes them. Why? Mildred could barely say it, too scared to know the answer. Vivian looked up at her. He loves them, it seems. But if he wants to punish someone, he'll introduce that person to his friends more closely. You won't die. He has antidotes for all the bites. The most important thing is not to show you're scared. I was scared at first, but then I don't care anymore. It happens, though, that you suffer for a while. You get a headache and it makes you sick. My God, how can you do this to me? My own son. He's not my father, Vivian said, without any emotion. I don't know how many times he married. But my mom, it was, well, a woman with a child. And where is she now? The boy shrugged. He told me my mom didn't like it here, and she really wanted to leave. He let her go, but he left me to make sure she didn't blab about the whole thing anywhere. See how well she listened to me. He said she never came after you. But I don't think my mom would have left me. So I don't know if she's alive or not. Why did he leave me? He doesn't have kids. Maybe he wants an heir, at least one like me. Or maybe I'm just a lab rat, or maybe he just wanted to invite his next victim. You were hired for me. Bird cried until late that night, and she didn't know where to spend the night. Now she could not set foot in her luxurious bedroom unless she made a great effort. Not that she was afraid her husband would come to her, cradling some deadly snake as gently as a child. She had already associated him herself with one of the exhibits in his collection. The scariest exhibit of all, she wanted more than anything to lie in the same room as Vivian, at least on the doorstep, but she knew that wasn't an option. For one thing, her husband had keys to all the doors. He could open any of them. Secondly, he could punish the boy for being too frank. What did Vivian want? As it was, the lad was barely warm. In the end, she lay down at her place, wrapped herself in a blanket with her head wrapped up, and pretended to be asleep. The blanket was so thick that it might not be bitten. It was better to be stuffy. Mildred heard her husband come in and settle himself at the other end of the bed. She lay holding her breath until he fell asleep. But then she couldn't sleep either. She pondered her escape options. It was clear the front door was locked. The bars on the windows had not pleased her at first, but her husband had told her, "Darling, there have been cases of thieves breaking into the house before. Nothing serious, just some scum who just want to take the first thing they see and drink it or trade it for dope. Besides, I'm away a lot, and if I put an alarm system on, they'll be here before they react. Believe me, you'll soon stop noticing those bars." She did. But now the castle was finally starting to feel like a prison. The only thing she realized was that it was useless to make scandals and demand something from this madman. Most likely, he would decide to punish her, and she wouldn't stand for it. She just won't, that's all. She shuddered at the thought of what she might be threatened with. "Vivian," she asked the boy the next day, "have you tried running away from here?" He wheeled around in his wheelchair in front of her, back and forth a little, but it was enough for her to realize what a fool she was. "And if you do succeed," he said, "he'll destroy me first. He's afraid you'll bring the police here. They'll find me." "But have you even thought about it?" she asked, almost desperately. Vivian was silent. Later, Mildred realized that he was considering whether to reveal to her the plan he had been hatching, which was his only hope of salvation. A plan he couldn't carry out without help. Vivian looked at Mildred with the eyes of an old man and felt sorry for her. "There's a back door," he said, "but only Pete uses it. Because that door opens and there's a bridge and a river. Pete likes to fish, but he's only got an inflatable boat. But you can't get to the oars. The boat's over there on the dock, and he's got the oars. That's okay. The river has a fast current. It'll carry him far without oars. And by the time they grab him, they say there are people downstream. Someone will notice. I don't know how to get there from here, only to move the horses. He won't reach us in the next world." "Oh, shall we try it?" Mildred asked in a low voice. Now she was ready to overestimate her husband, and to think that in every corner of the castle they were being watched and overheard. Vivian looked past her into the window, which was barred by a grate. Mildred suddenly realized how small and weak he was. Take his hand. There is almost no strength in it. And yet he had not yet given up hope of outwitting this madman. And Mildred also knew now that she could not leave here alone, and might have thought her resigned, just withdrawn. Her wife no longer objected to him, nor did she even speak to him herself, only answered his questions, and she avoided his company at all costs. Now he often found her with a book or needlework in the farthest corner of the house, where she sat until she had to give lessons to Vivian, or sit at the table, or take her place in the bedroom. He couldn't imagine how monstrous his touch was to her now. Or perhaps on the contrary, he imagined it and enjoyed it. So blissful was he in showing others his pets and reading the horror and disgust on their faces. Mildred sometimes thought with bitter humor that maybe karma would work, and Aaron's next wife would be a female herpetologist who would deal with his deadly menagerie and she also knew that the hour of escape was approaching, and that she and the boy would have only one chance to get out of here free. Only 2 days left, she thought, but from the very beginning things did not go as she had envisioned. Pete really was a fishing enthusiast. Perhaps there was no other entertainment for him here. There was plenty of work to do, and Aaron Jaeger didn't want any other servants. Only a few times a year, the workers came to tidy up the garden and clean the house. Everywhere except that very wing, there were only 2 keys to the door to the little underworld, as Mildred had dubbed it, the master and his servant. They could not fall into any other hands. Still, in summer, almost every day, and in winter, when there was no frost, Pete went to the river to meditate for an hour or 2 with a fishing rod. Not once did any fish he caught appear on the table, and there was nothing worthy of attention in the little river for small fish, cat's delight. Now Mildred kept her eyes on the servant, and was convinced that Vivian had indeed pointed out to her the only way of escape. The main entrance was clearly visible from any window, and the gate was locked, and the fence, topped with metal spikes, wasn't much of an escape route. The kitchen was another matter. Apparently, it never occurred to any of the unwilling prisoners of the castle to get to this semi-cellar and then unlock the inconspicuous door and climb up the ladder. There was almost no shore on this side, but there was a boardwalk, and the inflatable boat was always waiting for its owner. Mildred knew that on the last day of the month, Pete got a day off. He would leave for town late the night before and return 24 hours later. Who he was visiting, who was waiting for him. So unsociable, so self-absorbed, God only knew. So an escape could only be planned for that time. Pete didn't lock the kitchen and left the food he had prepared for the owners in the refrigerator. It was Mildred's job to do the housekeeping. There were times when she stayed up until nearly midnight washing dishes and putting things in order. When she came back upstairs, her husband was asleep. If things had gone on as before, Mildred and Vivian would have escaped. They wouldn't have been searched for until morning. What search at night? They'd be long gone by then. "Oh, can you come downstairs?" Mildred asked the boy. "Can you get to the kitchen?" "Oh, if I'd known it was going to burn out, I'd have crawled down on my hands and knees," said the boy. To keep the noise down, Mildred thought, or maybe it would be better if I came up behind you and carried you in my arms. You're light, and if all of a sudden, say you wanted to sit with me in the kitchen while I clean up, chat, drink tea. Vivian sighed so heavily that his breath was more like a spasm. On the evening of the evening in question, it looked as if his fate would be decided, whether he lived or not. And he knew it. For the remaining couple of days, Mildred lived with bated breath. She made no objection to her husband and behaved like a mute shadow. Only once did her eyes show confusion. When setting the table, Pete wondered whether he should take a day off this time. "Oh, well, I'll go," he finally decided. "My friend's been asking me to visit him for a long time." This meant that tomorrow Mildred would take Pete's place. And she turned to her husband with the most innocent voice. "Perhaps you would like me to prepare something special," and made a sign with his hand that it was not worth the trouble. He had no doubt that the servant had made sure that the dishes were ready long ago and were just waiting to be served. Pete glanced at his watch. "It would be good for me to leave early today," he said anxiously. "The weather is getting worse." Mildred tried to give her voice a careless tone. "I'll clean and wash everything myself." And in confirmation of her words, she began to collect dirty plates in a few minutes. She caught her husband's attentive gaze and shrugged her shoulders. After Pete left, Mildred spent a long time in the kitchen, looking for new jobs. She was scrubbing the spotlessly clean stove for the 10th time or rearranging the jars and boxes in the cupboard. And looked in, and she told him, "I've got a lot more to do here. Lie down, don't wait for me." She herself decided to go after Vivian after midnight, because at that time her husband was always already asleep. But what a bad night it had been. Even here in the kitchen, through the thick walls and double frames, she could hear the rain pounding outside. Then Mildred thought with horror that the boat might not be there. What owner would leave it on the shore in such bad weather? The venture seemed to her quite mad. What if she went out now and looked? There was a door. The door to the outside might be locked. Mildred felt a chill. She was not a burglar. She could not open the lock with a stiletto, and it was unlikely to be broken. Everything was so securely made here. But the lock yielded obediently when she grasped it. But what was happening outside? It was raining. Mildred ducked and ran to the dock and caught her breath when she saw the boat hidden under the shed.
Yet even escape was half the battle. Would she and the boy, who almost 100% likely couldn't swim, get to the nearest place where people lived? "I don't care," Mildred said to herself. "If not to the village, at least to the shore. I'll carry him on my hands from here."
She came back, wet as a mouse, and heard her husband's voice. "Please, finish up. It's late." "Oh, don't wait for me." "Finish it," he repeated with pressure. "God, where did you get so wet?" He was already on the threshold, and Mildred had no choice but to make frantic excuses. "I love a big thunderstorm." I couldn't resist. I wanted to have a look. He only shook his head and, taking her hand, led her into the bedroom. Mildred consoled herself with the fact that she had not made him so angry that he had resorted to punishment. And then she lay in bed beside him, listening to the big clock chiming softly, measuring half an hour, an hour. It was now the second hour of the night, and the storm seemed to be subsiding. Mildred knew that Vivian was waiting for her. He had not gone to bed. They had agreed, waiting, and he didn't know what was wrong, why she wasn't coming. Several times Mildred tried to get up, but her husband held her arm unconsciously in her sleep, and she was afraid to pull harder to wake him. It was already beginning to get light when she managed to get out of the bedroom. She moved as silently as a spirit, As she was in her nightgown, she flew upstairs, grabbed the sleepy boy in her arms, and started downstairs. Sneaking almost without breathing, she reached the kitchen, opened the door. The rain was almost gone, but it was freezing cold, and she had nothing to wrap the boy in. And Mildred said to herself again, "I don't care. Even if we get sick, we'll be cured." Just to get out, just to get out. She had never been in a boat before in her life, never had to. And now she lowered the boy into it in her. "Make yourself as comfortable as you can," she said to him. Now perhaps she had to sit down herself. Or not. First push the boat away from the shore, and then get into it. What if it was deep? What if this tiny little boat, like a toy ship, is swept up by the current? Mildred hesitated for a few moments, not knowing what to do, and then she saw Vivian's upturned face and his look of horror. She turned around, letting go the edge of the boat. Her husband was standing behind her back, staring there past her at the boy. Surely he was sure his wife would never leave him again. And here's the bastard. And then, with a last hopeless and desperate movement, she pushed the boat, falling into the water so that the river covered her head for a few moments, and pulled her out with a single tug. He raked the shirt down her back so that the wet straps dug painfully into her shoulders. He drove Mildred in front of him in jerks, ignoring the fact that she was stumbling, ready to fall at any moment. She realized that this was almost certainly the end of it for her now, but she was even more afraid for the boy. The last moment she'd seen him, the boat had been swept out of the middle of the river, and Vivian really couldn't swim. It was a small room, maybe 5 or 6 feet. There were no windows, so it wasn't really a room. It was a closet painted a dark red color, and pushed Mildred inside with such force that she fell to the floor. And she didn't even try to get up, huddled in a corner, covering her face with her hands. She was so scared she felt like she was going to throw up. "Did you want him to drown?" It struck her that her husband's voice remained as smooth and calm as ever. He seemed to have no doubt that nothing irreparable had happened. Mildred was entirely in his power, and Vivian, what of Vivian? The boy was unknown in the neighborhood. The fact that he was going to die was a free hand for this man. He wouldn't have to deal with it himself. And the child's death would never be linked to him. Mildred sobbed hysterically, sobbing, so it had all failed. She hadn't gotten out of the trap herself, and she'd killed the boy who trusted her. She heard the metal door slam shut. God knows how long she'll be in that closet. Maybe for the rest of her life. Her parents would remember her, of course. The first one must be her mom. But that may still be a very, very long time from now. Her folks think she's happily married. So much so that she's forgotten about them, doesn't even call, and they don't want to bother her. So they won't realize until it's too late. She heard footsteps approaching and froze. The door had opened. Mildred caught herself that her vision had become somehow peculiar. She did not see the whole picture. All she saw were hands shining with a metallic luster. A snake wriggled in each one. They were small, these snakes, and each one her husband looked at with love. They were truly of the same blood as him, and lowered his pets to the floor, very gently, as if he were dropping off children. Mildred could not make a sound out of horror. Even if she had tried, it would not have worked. She got up and stood huddled in the corner, not realizing what she looked like from the outside. Her mouth hanging open, her eyes bulging out of their orbits, and smiled, closed the door, and flicked the light switch. The room went dark. The darkness was absolute. The car pulled into a small village, one of those villages that at best gets a bus once a day. That's why the black, obviously expensive Jeep attracted the attention of all the inhabitants who happened to see it. The car stopped near the church. The man behind the wheel and the woman next to him sat silently for some time. The man's appearance was memorable. Curly black hair with light graying, a narrow and somehow long face, light green eyes under moving eyebrows. The woman was wearing dark glasses. She looked as if she had been seriously ill. "I guess you are dear to me after all," said the man. "You see, I let you go alive. What should I have entered your place 10 minutes later? Or just stand over you without doing anything?" The woman didn't utter a word. Her face remained as still as ever. "All right, go," the man allowed with a sigh. "You will walk 20 steps, and there they are, beggars sitting. You can join them. Or a kind person will find a kind person and call your parents to pick you up. But remember, if you say a word about me, you'll sign your sentence. No one can prove that what happened to you was my doing. I'll prove that you're crazy and obsessive compulsive, and after that, I promise you, either you or someone close to you will meet a snake somewhere. A pretty little snake that can send you to the grave faster than a lightning strike. Maybe one of you will find one under your pillow, or in your mailbox when you reach for the newspaper, or just in your shoe. Oh, snakes can get in anywhere. And to keep them away from you, all you have to do is keep quiet. The woman continued to stare in front of her. The man bent over, opened the door on her side. Go ahead, he said. She got out of the car awkwardly. And then he had to get out too, taking her by the shoulders and giving her a little push, pointing in the direction. That way, the woman walked with an uncertain, stumbling step. As she approached the beggars sitting at the temple entrance, the man started the motor and drove off.
Mildred knew that the darkness would stay with her forever. The antidote had kept her alive, but not her sight. Apparently something was irreversibly damaged in her until a few weeks ago, when she realized she was still alive. She had cursed fate and wondered how she could get her hands on herself. Because as a blind prisoner, her existence would be far worse than death.
Why Erin had decided to let her go, she did not know. In general, Mildred felt like Lazarus, the one who had been to the other world and returned. Drunk or something. She heard voices.
Mildred realized why people thought so. It was because of her wobbly, unsteady gait.
Give happy holidays, just in case. Someone dragged on, thinking that she might have. Mildred finally made it, grasped the church fence with both hands. Then she turned around. There she would stand, along with the other beggars. What to do next, she didn't know. And until the last moment, she wasn't sure her husband would let her go. Where did you come from? The woman's voice was angry. Don't you have anything to eat? Asking for Christ's sake. You're dressed so well. Mildred didn't know what she was wearing. Just some dress. Her husband zipped up the back this morning. I guess I should have reached out and said something like this. Like all these people, have pity. Mildred didn't know the name of the village she was in now. But in any case, to get to her father or mother, she would need some money. She tried to remember their phone numbers, but the numbers danced in front of her eyes, confused, and she wasn't sure of anything. And the only address she could remember was the apartment where they had once lived together. She was sick, very sick. Someone put a coin in her palm, and only by touch, by the size of the money, Mildred could determine that it was 5 rubles. She wanted to do something to thank those who had given her the money. She could not kiss their hands, could she? She couldn't even see the hands. So she sang, "Your voice will come back to you in your time of need." She remembered someone's almost forgotten words. Mildred was prepared to sing in a voice that was broken and wrong, that the same beggars would ask her to be silent, but she was sure to be swept up and carried along. She did not know spiritual songs, and how could she know them? Romances came to mind, and for some reason she remembered their words, about white acacia bunches and black eyes, and about how she sat in anxiety at the open window. Her voice was gaining and gaining strength, so that she herself became afraid. Was there a limit to it, or did it rise from earth to heaven? Someone nearby cried thinly, pitifully, but it was not a child, some old woman most likely. And then Mildred was taken by the arm, and a man's voice asked, "What is your emergency?" "It's the priest, Father Alexander." It suggested in a whisper from somewhere off to the side. Apparently, everyone had already realized that the singer was blind. "And so, here's the money they threw at you. I collected it. Put your hands up." And then she was sitting somewhere in the temple because it smelled like incense. And the phone number she remembered turned out to be right. And her mother cried into the phone and said she was going to pick her up. She was on her way. Probably not even the impressionable cleaning lady at the police department believed her story. Mildred said she had a fight with her husband and left. Yeah, just like that, in a fit of emotion, just up and left to spite him. Didn't even call a cab, went through the woods to town. And got lost, of course. I think someone bit her, probably a snake, because she was sick for a while. And she doesn't remember a lot of things, or like how she ended up in this village. She probably got a ride from someone. You realize this isn't even a white thread. The white threads were just put on top. Finally, the investigator couldn't stand it. "You're lying to me. Who are you protecting? Who are you afraid of?" "That's all I know," Mildred repeated mechanically, like an automaton. The only reason she was left behind was because she didn't want to press charges against anyone. It was easier for the police. They found her, she was alive, and that was all right. Mildred's father insisted that the coroner call her husband. But Aaron wasn't at home, and faithful Pete, shrugging his shoulders, said he didn't know where his master had gone, or for how long. He doesn't report to me. The medical examinations were of little use. The parents saw that their daughter had changed dramatically, from a blossoming girl to a colorless woman of indeterminate age. The doctors said that there were no critical changes in the body. In time, Mildred would get stronger, the nevroses could be brought under control. As for her eyesight, well, people live blind. Mildred didn't have to think about what to do now, how to make a living. She got a disability, but that wasn't the answer, of course, and it wasn't even the little money. Mildred would go crazy locked up in four walls, so she accepted when she was called to the House of Culture. She was organized as a leader of some fake circle, but in fact she became a decoration of all the evenings and concerts. After a while, people went to see her, and then she was invited to sing at a big concert on the main stage of the city. There was television, rave reviews wrote, and journalists. Mildred prophesied a career, asked if she did not want to try to be treated abroad, surprised that she does not suffer at all-star disease. And it seemed to her that all the worst happened to her yesterday, that not a year has passed, and one night. And this fear settled in her soul, tormented her more than the darkness before her eyes. He couldn't believe it when he saw her on the news feed. He hadn't had a television in his house for a long time, and he didn't read newspapers, but he used the internet as his only window to the world. Leaving Mildred to her fate, he saw two possibilities. Most likely, she would contact her parents and live very quietly, dependent on her mother. It would be a struggle for survival, like other people with severe physical disabilities, or she will not want to upset her loved ones, to show them what she has become. Then she will hobble around for the rest of the century, or she will end up in some boarding school for the disabled or just get drunk. There's no third way. But when he saw her in the picture, getting out of the expensive car, when he recognized Mildred, even though she wore dark glasses, his rage rose up in him. She had managed to fool him after all. He had found no trace of the boy. He had not been seen alive or dead since his escape, and Mildred herself had settled down well, while he, on the other hand, was forced to live quietly, without attracting attention. It wasn't fair. And for a moment, he realized that justice had to be done. Himself, the instrument of retribution he chose, was the very snake of which Mildred had spoken. Small but fast as lightning, death would come no later than 45 minutes after the bite. No one would even know to find an antidote in that time. He was so absorbed in his idea, so focused on it, that the plan came together very quickly. The snake would fit in the case, and it would be so easy to hide it among the bouquet of flowers. When was the next time the newfound star would take the stage? He looked at the playbill and almost laughed. She was supposed to perform on an outdoor stage in a city park. If anything, he could hide unnoticed in the crowd, or maybe he'd want to stay and watch the performance to the end, so she could finally go to the other world, where she'd be waiting for him to go before his eyes. It will be easy, because she won't see him. She won't realize who handed her the bouquet. And at that very moment, he'll open the case. Every morning when Mildred woke up, the first thing she did was to sing some musical phrase, checking to see if the voice had disappeared. She saw it not as something inalienable that would stay with her forever, but as a miracle that came to her, a miracle that lasted and lasted and lasted. This is how Indian summer, the gift of autumn, can be delayed for a week or two, but every morning you look anxiously outside the window. Whether the clear warm weather has not changed to endless cold rain. For this concert, her mother had chosen her a long light dress with a wide belt. She assured her that it suited Mildred very well. Mom had learned to drive the car too. During that year, they arrived shortly before the concert began, and while they waited, they sat near the stage, on a bench that was drowned in lilac bushes. Mildred was silent, and her mother did not disturb her, realizing that her daughter should tune in to the performance, to that high mental elevation without which it is impossible for a true artist to go to the audience. And then came a woman organizer, and taking Mildred under the arm, led her to the stage, helped her up the steps, and left her only after she had put a microphone in her hand. Mildred was called for an encore, again and again, but she only shook her head. The other performers waited their turn. "Come, Sabu," she heard her say. "They are bringing you flowers." It was a rare occasion, if everyone could remember one, when Mildred was not handed bouquets. And here she stood at the edge of the stage, bent over, the flowers in cellophane crunching slightly audibly in her left hand, and to her right one of the admirers pressed his lips. Mildred froze. She recognized that scar, those scarred lips. "Vince," she said almost fearfully. Is that you? Wait, I'll be right down." She knew which way to go, where the stairs were by the stage. And near the stairs she was picked up by someone's strong hand. And now she is already standing on the hard ground and feels the furry side of the dog. "You're not alone. You have no idea what has happened to me in all this time." "I have no idea," said the voice she happened to remember all this time. "I know. Oh, but how?" "Vivian told me. He really wanted you to be told he's alive. We've got him. You picked him up. That's how it happened. Our fisherman saw him first. And now he lives with us. He's got no family left. Nobody wants him in the world." Mildred put her hands on her head. It was impossible that it could have turned out this way. Vince touched her shoulder. "They're still bringing you flowers," he said. Later, Mildred tried to reconstruct the picture, but couldn't. She had been standing next to him, but the memory had definitely shattered into fragments. She reached out for the bouquet. A stifled growl, Vincent's shout, a sudden movement beside her, and a heavy groan. And the blood drained from her face, and the darkness before her eyes began to dissipate. Or dog's dog bite, she heard around her. And then she saw him, this terrible man who still appeared to her in her dreams. And now he was lying in front of her in the dust and squirming, tearing his throat with his fingers, as if he did not have enough air, and a small snake was slithering on his body, raised its chiseled head and hissed, warning the others that she was not to be trifled with. People scrambled away, unable to understand. Vincent wanted to draw her away too. He had hardly seen the black foreign visitor before, but Mildred knew the price of its bite. Did she get to the dog before it bit her? Is the dog all right? Right on the lawn, he began to examine the dog. He must be okay. If she'd knocked a man off his feet like that, the dog would be finished. Right there. He had never thrown himself out of the blue before. And then he grabbed his hands and suddenly, out of nowhere, a snake. What the hell was that? He caught Mildred's eye and realized she could see. And she knew that if she went back, if she dared to approach her ex-husband and empty his pockets, there must be an antidote hidden in there somewhere. When taking one of his pets with him, he made sure to take the antidote for its bite. Or because accidents can happen, he told her. It was so long ago in some past life. But now, it could have saved his life. And that vial of antidote is probably the only one in the whole city. I don't think the medics here have an antidote for rare African snakes. Mildred hugged the dog and buried her face in his gray fur. Then Vince, holding her by both hands, helped her up. "Let's get out of here," said Mildred. "Mama's probably looking for me. You can tell me all about it on the way, and you tell me." And they went on, saying something to each other, sometimes interrupting each other. And a gray dog like a wolf trotted along beside them.